Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Monsieur le connétable... pardon. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Présent. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le connétable de Greville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Sutton. Madame le député Labbé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier. Monsieur le député Luce. Madame le député Dublay. Monsieur le député Morel. Madame le député Lehegara. Monsieur le député Ayer. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves. Madame le député Gardner. Monsieur le député Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham. Madame le député Moore. Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Joseph.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles.
Présent.
Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député War. Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet. Madame le député Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le député Miller. Madame le député Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac. Monsieur le député Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame la députée Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil de prudence, d'unir le cœur et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute l'heure de l'opération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussis au bien et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plût de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite en la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Malade.
Vous jurez que Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément est tellement exposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le député Sutton.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Tadier.
Défaut.
Madame le député Dublé.
Malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le député Dublé est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le député Morel. Vous jurez que Monsieur le député Morel est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le député Ayer.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves.
Défaut.
Madame le député Gardner. Vous jurez que Madame le député Gardner est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le député Farnham.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Défaut.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Excuse me, sir. Can we raise the defo on Deputy Alves, please?
Yes, the defo is raised on Deputy Alves.
And sir, I'm sorry, I was a little slow on the uptake with Deputy War. He is attending an event on State's business and will be a little late in the Assembly this morning.
Well, we need to mark Deputy War defo excusé, and we will raise the defo on Deputy Alves. Very well. We now resume the debate on the removal of 5% goods and services tax. Does any other member? Deputy Labby.
Thank you. I don't intend to make a long speech about this, just to say a few words. I'd like to thank Deputy Kovac for her very well-researched and heartfelt proposition. My stance on taxing food remains the same as it was in 2009. I believe it is immoral to tax food, end of, regardless of the complexities around it. If Deputy Kovac's proposition is not successful, I will consider bringing forward some exemptions on locally grown food for local markets, as my manifesto suggested, because I think that could be a compromise situation. But as Minister, I am extremely grateful to the Council of Ministers for respecting my views in this matter. And I would just like to say, sir, I've got to leave the Assembly later on this morning for a hospital appointment. So if I'm not here for the vote, I very much hope I can be marked accordingly. Thank you, sir.
Well, obviously your vote can only be registered if you actually vote, but you'll be marked absent before excusé in the event that you're not here for the vote. Colin Tarpson-Tellier.
Thank you, sir. As the father of the house, which I believe is a term that's applied to me these days, I have to be careful that I don't sound too nostalgic or cynical when I address the Assembly. But I was doing a little bit of research of my own in preparation for this debate, and I came across a petition that was lodged 15 years ago, in September 2007, by the Constable of St Helier, asking the then Minister of Treasury and Resources to take no further steps to introduce a goods and services tax in Jersey until public finances had been examined independently to identify potential savings and until alternative methods of raising funds had been investigated. That petition was signed by 19,209 members of the public, and as far as I know, it was it remains the largest petition gathered in Jersey in living memory. I stand to be corrected if it's been overtaken. The closest one I'm aware of is the petition to create the Millennium Town Park in 1997, which I also had the privilege of presenting to the States in December 1997, 10 years earlier, which gathered 16,404 signatures. The arguments I presented to the States when it was debated, and there maybe still a handful of members who were here when I did so, didn't carry a lot of weight. I remember it was fairly heavily defeated because the government wanted to get their hands on the cash machine, as I called it in my opening remarks, the ministerial cash machine of GST, which then, of course, was only going to be 3%. And the argument I made was chiefly, as I say, around the fact that I believed then, and I believe it now, although I've stopped saying it so much, that the government is profligate. The government wastes money, wastes taxpayers' money hand over fist, and it hasn't stopped, it hasn't got any better since then. The example I sometimes give, and I apologise to hard-working members in this particular branch of the civil service, is the communications unit, which when I joined the States in 1996 had, I think, 3 members of staff, and it now has, I believe, over 30. And I'm not sure that our comms are that much better than they were when I started, but I remain to be corrected. And there's no question that the payroll is the big spend of this government. That's what we spend money on. Look at the newspaper the other day, which told us someone was going to get an eye-watering salary for a few days' work a week in Jersey. And this goes on. And the public are tired of it. They're tired of the golden handshakes. They're tired of the way the civil service seems to grow, and yet, paradoxically, we're being told by some ministers they simply haven't got any staff to do essential work that the public want us to get done. And because I'm not in government, I'm only a backbencher, I have to focus on trying to make sure that the organisation that I run deals with money better than the states, that we bear down on expenditure, we become more and more efficient without losing public services. So I felt that passionately then, and I used to incur the wrath of former Senator Frank Walker and then former Senator Terry LeSueur by accusing them of being profligate. And I think I incurred the wrath of former Senator Deputy Ozef. He's looking wrathfully at me now, and I'm sure he's going to have a go at me in due course. One of the reasons I opposed GST so passionately was because of the effect on tourism. And I was really keen then on there being a politician responsible for tourism who might have come to that debate and argued passionately that Jersey needed to keep that USP to compete in the market. It needed to be the only Channel Island or the only place in the British Isles where you could go and not pay a sales tax. And of course, we gave up that. We didn't have then, we haven't got one now, an Assistant Minister of Tourism. There was no one to make that case apart from me and our sister island, and I'm sure I'm going to be lectured about how awful their finances are. Our sister island took the view not to introduce a goods and sales tax. I don't know whether they exploit that as much as they could to their tourists, but certainly I think it could have done. There were lots of letters from tourists. I won't read them to members now, but I included them in my proposition. People who felt that Jersey was expensive enough anyway without introducing a goods and services tax. And of course, local people were opposed to it for the obvious reasons, or the reasons that many members have alluded to. So that went through. It duly went up to 5%. The cash machine has been churning away ever since. So what were the alternatives that the states did not look at and have not looked at? These were alternatives that were being kicked around at the start of the millennium. And the big one was environmental taxation. And a lot of people don't have a problem with environmental taxation, because they're particularly now, because they know it is part of our climate change response. And making people who do things which hurt the environment pay more for that privilege. Environmental taxes have been more or less ignored. Now, maybe the revenue implications of environmental taxes couldn't make up for the deficit, but I still think that a combination of good housekeeping on the part of the states of Jersey and introducing taxes which were focused on improving the environment will be much better than GST. And so, my position in this debate is, I'm not going to give way. I'm not going to give way because
sorry, on a point of order?
On point of order. So is this relevant to the proposition before the Assembly?
Well, that's in a sense a matter Deputy, for the Conetable, I'm sure he's bringing it to a point of direct relevance. It seems to me that it is arguably relevant because it's talking about alternatives to GST, which may or may not support the removal of GST in these circumstances. And I'm prepared to give the Conetable a little bit further leeway before making it directly relevant.
Thank you, sir. I was just coming to my peroration when I was interrupted. So I'll come to it now. So my position on this proposition, as indeed previous propositions which have been trying to do something about GST, has always remained the same. I agree with the Deputy, I used to call him the Deputy of Trinity, Deputy Luce, I have to call him now, who believes that GST should be a simple, targeted and fair.
I think the Deputy has never been Deputy of Trinity.
Sorry.
He's been Deputy of St Martin.
St Martin. I've clearly been here too long. Yes, getting confused. So, sir, my position is that if a member had brought forward a proposition, if the Reform had brought forward a proposition to abolish GST, I'd be the first to get together my arguments to support it. I don't think it's a good tax. And I think you know, we should have been stronger in getting rid of it. But I don't support tinkering with it and adding to the complexity of it. And so therefore I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Ferrier.
Thank you, sir. And I too thank Deputy Kovacs for bringing this proposition because it brings out the wider issues in a healthy debate. The issue of food banks was raised yesterday, and having spent over a decade in the charitable sector, I've worked very closely with all the food banks in Jersey, and I've seen them grow over the years, and I've seen them service more and more of their customers over the years. And I've heard people say, I wish there wasn't food banks in Jersey. Now, when the pandemic hit Jersey and we went into lockdown, just before lockdown, I was seconded to work for the government to bring together the community effort. And I can tell you that I was very glad that food banks existed during those short weeks and months when people couldn't leave their homes and we were really concerned for very many vulnerable people. Because it would have been very difficult for government to put in place the provision and the channels that were already there to support vulnerable members of our community. So my task was just to lay as much resources and money at those channels to make sure that people were properly serviced. So I don't wish at all that food banks didn't exist in Jersey. And in fact, the Social Security Minister and I have visited all of the food banks. And these are not one-off visits. These are not just meet and greets. This is a long-term relationship that we're developing. And the reason we wanted to meet with the food banks was to understand the needs of their clients and understand people's reasons for visiting food banks. And bizarrely, it's not all about food. It's about companionship. It's about signposting to other services that can help. It's about access to mental health. It's about access to government services, because all of the food banks have got a really good direct line to CLS, where if they've got an emerging problem, they can speak to someone, as can any member of the public. But they've got that trusted source where people can go because they don't have those communications, and we make sure that those people are serviced. So it's more than just a food bank, they're community hubs. And we heard from the Dean yesterday about his warm spaces. And in a conversation before this Assembly sat this morning, I said that perhaps those warm spaces could continue into next spring and next summer and become cool spaces. And the Dean remarked that the church is always cool spaces. So when I turn to the proposition, I just asked myself 3 questions. Can we guarantee that there will be a recurring £10 million loss in revenue by this proposition coming in? And we can guarantee that that's what will happen. Equally, can we guarantee that that 5% reduction will be passed on to the consumer? And we cannot guarantee that that's what will happen. So are there sufficient safeguards in place to protect the most vulnerable in our community through the community cost bonus, through the charitable sector and all the other good provisions that are out there? And we can say that. So for all of those three reasons, I will not be supporting this proposition, sir.
Deputy Balash.
So I'm pleased to follow my colleague from the Jersey Liberal Conservatives because I agree very much with what he has said, and I'm sure that all members actually will agree that the cost of living crisis is here and that something should be done to help those who most need it. Where we disagree is on what should be done. For my part, I think that the doubling of the community costs bonus, meaning that eligible households will receive twice approximately what they pay in GST, is infinitely preferable to abolishing GST on food, which confers maybe half the benefit of the bonus. Indeed, in my view, it is a no-brainer. But it is the collateral damage from Deputy Kovac's proposition which troubles me more. The excellent comments paper from the Council of Ministers sets out very clearly the different arguments, and I'm not going to go there. But one thing, it seems to me, does need to be underlined. If we do this, we will delegate some of our legislative authority over GST to the United Kingdom government. We are the elected representatives of the people of Jersey, but it is MPs at Westminster who will decide how GST on food is to be regulated if we pass this proposition. The Reform Party may not be concerned about that, but many other members will think that handing over constitutional authority to the members of another parliament, unelected by the people of Jersey, is a step too far. The proposition states, in order to exempt or zero rate the following items: food, excluding alcoholic drinks, to be based upon the zero rating categorization of food utilised by UK VAT arrangements as set out in Appendix A. It's very clear. Both Deputy Kovacs and the government indeed agree that if GST is removed from food in Jersey, the only practical administrative solution is to link our GST rules to the VAT rules in the UK. I leave aside the costs and complications of VAT, which are substantial. I am concerned with the constitutional implications. Suppose that a regulation in the UK changes the rules. We will be obliged to follow suit. There are two ways of doing that, as indeed was explained by Deputy Gorst. The first is that we debate similar regulations in this chamber. Debate is perhaps not the right word, because we will have no choice if we have linked our GST rules to VAT rules. In order to avoid administrative chaos, we will have to rubber stamp what has been done in England, whether we like it or not. It's not, to my mind, a very attractive proposition. But the second option is even worse. We could introduce what are called ambulatory provisions. That is, we could legislate here to state that any provision on GST on food enacted or brought into force in England will automatically become law in Jersey. Whatever MPs or a minister thinks or may decide in relation to the UK VAT rules on food will change Jersey law without anything needing to be done by the states. I must say I find that an even more unattractive proposition. Furthermore, this delegation of authority is in relation to tax, an area of law where our ancestors have ferociously fought to defend our autonomy. It would be a grave mistake, in my view, to adopt this proposition.
Excuse
Could I
me.
lift the defo on Deputy Teddy, please?
The defo is lifted on Deputy Tadier. Does anyone wish to speak? Deputy Tadier.
Yeah, might as well go for it. Strike whilst the iron's hot. I'll take this off. It's not for show. It's not a prop, but it takes the weight off. Don't need it all the time. Sir, I'm glad I was prompted to speak by what I think is the complete over-egging of the pudding by former Senator Balash, now Deputy Balash. This is now, it seems to have turned into a constitutional debate about what Jersey can and cannot do, where at the very core of it, it's a very simple yes or no, and there are arguments, quite rightly, being made for and against this proposition. It's compelling, I think, and it doesn't go away, and it doesn't go away for a very good reason. But let me first of all tackle head-on the issue of why this isn't a constitutional matter, but it is a matter about whether we decide to tax the essentials and whether we can live with that in order to make a compromise of getting £10 million into the coffers for the Treasury. And I'll explain why that last position is not one I'm comfortable with either. The first point is that this Assembly is not completely sovereign. We're not a sovereign state. We're not a small island state, a small nation state. But we do have a prized level of autonomy that quite rightly we should all be conscious of and that we will all fight for, I think. But the truth is that we select legislation all the time from around the world. I mean, GST, when it was introduced to Jersey, we can start the clock, incidentally. I probably shouldn't alert anyone to that. I thought for a moment I might be the main respondent on constitutional matters, but God forbid that should ever be the case.
You've already been speaking for 1.5 minutes, and so we will take the 1.5 minutes.
I thought we might get some World Cup leeway and get an extra 10 minutes added to the end of each speech, so, for injury time, quite appropriately. But getting back to the constitutional point, the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, it's exactly the same as what they've got in the UK and around Europe, because it's a European convention. I'm glad we've got that. There are a couple of minor differences. We don't have Article 1, and I think there's another article that we don't have. But it's copied and pasted, and that's because we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time we do something. The person who came over to Jersey to be the guru for GST, as I was just explaining before, I interrupted myself, was somebody from New Zealand. He wasn't from New Zealand, but he went over to New Zealand to set up their GST system. And we effectively copied and pasted what New Zealand were doing to the Jersey model. And when we do other areas of policy or lawmaking, we sometimes take the best approach from a hybrid approach. We might combine the best of laws from Scotland and around the Commonwealth, whatever works for us. And this is what we're doing here. It doesn't mean it's going to be frozen in aspic. It means that if in the future we want to decide that all food should be exempt from GST, we can do that. And it's this Assembly which will make those rules. So let's not turn this into a constitutional issue. That's a complete red herring. It is a basic economic issue. It's also an ethical issue for me. And I know that one member behind me who's been in the Assembly longer than me, the Deputy Carolyn Labby, has probably thought the same as me. For me, this is very simple. It boils down to ethics, and it boils down to morality. And is it moral to tax the bread in somebody's mouth that they're putting in the mouth when we never used to do that? In this rich island, that's what we're doing. So it's not about caviar, it's not about Jaffa cakes, and it's not about dried or wet biscuits or cakes. It's about the reality on the street is that at some point in the past, a government, and I remember that because I was in the Royal Square at one of the demonstrations against GST, had a clear choice. They had a choice whether to tax capital and tax the wealthy and tax companies in particular, or are we going to tax the food in people's mouths, including that £10 million a year that the Treasury gets from poor people, and not just poor people, it's actually people right across the board who are having to pay for the basic essentials when they go to the supermarkets. And when we hear this empty rhetoric saying that, oh, but the 5%, there's no guarantee that that's going to come off food. Well, there's one guarantee that you can make if you vote against this proposition today, is it will stay on food. It won't come off. And we've already had the likes of the Co-op, one of the biggest retailers in Jersey, telling us that they will take it off food. Are we going to not take them at their word? Do we have any reason to disbelieve them for that? And last night, I didn't sleep particularly well last night. I think I woke up early thinking of this debate and thinking of the Dean's words, in fact. And I thought, it's not often that we hear the Dean speak in this assembly. And I think he, very much like the Lieutenant Governor, has got a slightly different position. He is allowed to address the assembly whenever he wants to, in fact. And he exercises that right, I think, with discretion, recognising the current constitutional setup that he's not elected, but he's nonetheless got a voice when he wants to use it. And I thought, why would the Dean intervene in a speech that's ostensibly about tax? It's because it's not just an economic issue, it's an ethical issue. And that's when the church, I think, does feel it's got to have a voice, not just speaking for its own congregation, indeed not just for the faith congregation, but for the wider population that it sees in Jersey. And he spoke very well, I thought, about the fact that the church isn't just there to meet spiritual needs, it's actually there to meet physical needs. And can I congratulate the Dean, actually? I really like the way that the church has been opened up. I popped in there a few times in the last couple of months with my laptop, realised you can get a coffee, and it's got that feeling that you only get in some religious places where it's very peaceful, unlike maybe working downstairs in one of the rooms. So I welcome the fact that he's opened up the church. And it's not just him or the Church of England that's doing that in the island. It's faith groups and it's non-faith groups that are putting on food banks for people, that are welcoming people day in, day out. And they will tell us things privately when we're dealing with constituents that they won't necessarily say publicly. Again, they're very cautious of their position not to over-politicise things. But they realise that things are tough for people out there. And the way I look at it is that we might say, well, where are we going to find that £10 million? I look at it politically and think that £10 million should never have been taken out of people's pockets in the first place. It was never ethical to tax the basics in life, to tax bread, to tax Jersey milk, to tax butter, to tax everything that you need to feed your family. And of course, we can perform all sorts of intellectual somersaults and find all sorts of excuses and justifications. And sometimes I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I hear long-standing people who have been commentators or interested in politics. And I know that only a few months ago, only a few years ago, they would have been some of the first people saying it's completely immoral and we stand side by side. Incidentally, to finish my point on the Dean, I was really impressed that he didn't allow himself to be drawn on the politics of it. So there was, unusually, I think, a point of clarification to the Dean, and he simply said that we should try and look after the most vulnerable in our society. And that leads me to think, well, does that mean that the Council of Ministers might think that they're off the hook, or that previous administrations might think that they're off the hook because they said, well, it's okay because we look after the most vulnerable, we give them the money back that they would have spent on food, that we calculate that they would have spent on food. Now, first of all, before we get into the administration of that, how much does it cost for them to sit down and work out how much some poor people in the island spend on food and how much we should be giving back as an administrative process. But let's not look at that, because that's not really the meat of the argument. The meat of the argument is actually that there are so many people, and I think we've heard it in other places, the just about managing, the jams, as they're called. There are lots of people in Jersey that we know that fall outside the cracks of the system. The just about managing, perhaps the ones who have not been here for 5 years. How do we justify people who will never be able to qualify for a food bonus because they're not eligible for whatever reason, but who are nonetheless living very marginal existences, saying to them, you know, that 5% you're paying, good on you, because you're doing that so that some companies in Jersey can avoid paying any tax at all. That's the reality that we're dealing with. And I don't say that in terms of blame. I'm not pointing the finger at any one government or this government, but that's the reality, is that we're taxing the bread in people's mouths so that some foreign companies can continue to pay 0% tax in Jersey at a time when we're seeing properties being left empty in Jersey. I know about them that are either owned locally or not locally, and people are realizing, hang on a minute, who is this island run for? When we're making policies in this assembly, we elect people into this assembly to make policies presumably for the whole island, and yet time and time again we see policies being made for people who don't live here, and not even necessarily people who don't live here, but entities that don't live in the island. That's who the island is run for, they think. And they come and listen possibly to a debate like this today, or more likely they read about it later on and they realise, yet again, the Assembly has decided that they know best, that it's all right to tax the essentials in life. I will put a challenge. I want to listen to what ministers say. I'm hearing that there's probably a lot of cohesion. They're standing behind the comments that the Council of Ministers have issued. But I know that actually the Council of Ministers is much more sophisticated in terms of its makeup, in terms of the individuals who make it up. It's not simply a core of Better Way candidates who are going to follow the party whip every time. We've got intelligent people from all over the island, from different backgrounds. And I remember one of the candidates, I won't name her, but she knows who she is. And I remember her standing on the platform saying that we need to consider a GST holiday. And I remember thinking, what does that mean, a GST holiday? It's a really interesting idea. I wonder how that's going to get through the Council of Ministers if she ever ends up being a minister. And it's a really interesting idea, and maybe that person will say, well, that manifesto pledge no longer counts because it's been supplanted by the government's mini budget, and that's actually done the job, and I no longer need that. If that's the case, she needs to stand up and say that. And of course, there are many ways to skin a cat, if you excuse the unfortunate expression. But when we make pledges like that on an election platform, it's really important that people follow through, I think, on their policies. And if they say, actually, I'm not going to do that anymore. And listening to the Channel report yesterday, I don't always do it, and I commend Deputy Kovacs. I thought she did very well, both in her opening speech and on the interview for that. There was a lady outside Iceland in Lekennabay, I noticed, at the precinct, and she said, yes, it would definitely help if GST was taken off food, even if it was just done temporarily. Well, I think we can do better than that. I think we can do better than a GST holiday. I think we can do better than taking it temporarily off food. We can take it permanently off food. Now lastly, I'll leave with this point. Deputy Kovacs did touch on it, and we've talked about U-turns, of course, haven't we? I particularly like the clever phrase that Deputy Gorse did a U-turn somewhere between Le Hoc and L'Etaque. And I came in on the bus with my wife this morning. We were reading it in the paper, and my wife said, "Did you write that?" I said, "No, not at all." I said, "I wish I had." I said, "I think that's Deputy Kovacs' words, but I'm going to ask her about that." I'm oversharing, sir. But it's a good line. And when we talk about U-turns, I'm reminded about one that happened only a few months ago. We have a now Chief Minister who brings to the Assembly a few months before an election a quite right proposition, a very correct proposition, one that we might have brought ourselves, which said to remove GST on sanitary products. And of course, the expected arguments came back from the government of the day, the machine, which says you can't possibly do that because GST can't have any exemptions in it. Can't have any exemptions, and if we do that, it's going to be administratively burdensome, got there in the end, and it's also, it's not going to be effective. And indeed, the Social Security Minister, Deputy Martin, stood up and said, look, we don't need to do this because we're going to make all of these products free. It was that Social Security Minister who made sanitary products free. That's her idea. It wasn't the current government. But in spite of all that, Deputy Moore, Senator Moore at the time, and Reform Jersey said, no, that's fine, Deputy Martin, you can make the sanitary products free, but you're also going to take GST off them. And the Assembly agreed with Senator Moore. The Assembly agreed that it was right to take GST off sanitary products only a few months before an election. And I suspect the public knew that's the right thing to do. Why? Because it's immoral to tax the basics in life. And it's also immoral to tax something which only women pay for. How much more immoral is it to tax something that everybody has to pay for and that nobody can get round? If you want to avoid tax if you're rich, you can do it. How do you avoid tax if you're poor? In Jersey, you don't avoid tax if you're poor because we even put it on the bread in your mouth. I'll leave members with that thought. For me, it boils down to a very basic ethical issue. What kind of island are we running here? What kind of ship are we running here, sir? It's got to be one that runs for the people, not simply for those who are able to avoid tax if they want to.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I address the Assembly today as the Minister for Home Affairs and therefore as the Minister with responsibility for Jersey Customs and Immigration, who are, of course, responsible for the collection of customs import duties, which includes import GST. It's acknowledged that the Deputy's proposition does not prescribe how or where the zero rating of food is administered. And if her proposition is successful, a decision will need to be taken as to whether to adopt the UK VAT framework or make other arrangements. As we all know, GST is currently levied on all goods on arrival in the island, unless they're subject to a relief, of which there are very few, and her proposition does make specific reference to UK arrangements where VAT is charged on import. I therefore wish to ensure members are made aware of what the operational impact of the removal of GST from food on importation might be. I've had long conversations with officers at Customs, and they indicate that the removal of GST from food would create significant operational disruption were it to be administered on import, which would directly impact the public. By the very nature of being a small island, the majority of the food and drink we consume is imported, and often in mixed consignments, as opposed to being imported in bulk, as is the case in the UK. Additionally, it should be noted that private imports through a customs clearance process, in proportion, are far greater here than the UK, and so the impact upon the public, as opposed to a wholesaler, is significantly higher. An individual in the UK who imports from an online retailer is likely to be supplied from a warehouse whose goods have all cleared customs formalities. However, goods imported into Jersey by the public have to cross a customs border and so require declarations if they're above the de minimis level. The picture's further complicated by planned changes that will see large offshore retailers collecting GST at the point of sale with no de minimis from July 2023. So retailers who regularly ship food to Jersey, such as Amazon or HelloFresh, for example, would need to amend their systems to zero-rate relevant food items, which they are not currently expecting to do and may not be able to implement. In which case, we could see GST charged wrongly, which could result in a huge administrative burden to process refunds. The proposition does not acknowledge the resource requirements. If the Customs and Immigration Service are required to support GST zero rating on food, a significant investment in the freight handling system, known as CESA, will be required. We will need to create a library of goods codes, accounting for every single food item, so it can be ascertained on declaration whether GST would be applicable or not. It's currently unknown what the cost of this work would be, or whether it would even be possible to implement this on or prior to the beginning of 2024, as per the proposition, particularly given the ongoing impacts to the Customs and Immigration Department of Brexit and the changes to the de minimis due to be introduced next July. What is clear to me, however, is that this cost would not be able to be met within existing Home Affairs budgets. The financial and manpower statement in the Deputy's proposition includes a figure of 360,000 to account for the costs of implementation for the Tax Department and the Law Drafting Office, in addition to the loss of revenue, but it doesn't seem to consider the costs to Customs and Immigration, which are likely to be considerable. Additional resource would not only be required to develop and design relevant software, it's anticipated that a significant increase in staffing resources would also be required to assist with the navigation of the declaration process, which would become much more complex, with more consignments being detained for longer pending declaration. And this would also have an unsatisfactory effect on freight companies. As goods currently imported into Jersey from the UK enjoy free movement under the Customs Union, it is unknown how many consignments contain foodstuffs, which would therefore need to be declared using the goods codes functionality. An increase in goods being detained pending declaration will tie up staff resources within customs, leading to delays in the clearing of other goods which require officer intervention to collect customs duties. It's also likely that many of these items will be perishable, which increases the inconvenience for islanders when they're detained. Not only will this require additional staffing or risk pressuring existing resource, who in my opinion are better served on the borders and anti-smuggling work, it's also likely to impact other activities the service undertake, such as delaying the compliance and audit work currently undertaken and planned. So I would ask the Assembly to seriously consider the significant resource implications of this decision, which go some way beyond the loss of income from the GST currently collected on food. For my part, I would prefer to target our spending directly at addressing the difficulties associated with the cost of living crisis, rather than using it to employ more customs officers and start yet another complex, expensive IT development project. Given that the proposer makes reference to UK VAT arrangements, I'd like to draw the Assembly's attention to issues which could arise if we were to implement that framework in particular. And certainly the constitutional arrangements have been covered by Deputy Balash. We've talked a lot over the last couple of days about the humble Jaffa cake and the problem that that can present at the UK border. But the true implications are likely to go much further. We would, in essence, need to make wholesale change in the way the goods arriving in the island from the Customs Union would be cleared. This accounts for around 90% of the goods arriving into Jersey. The only goods that would not be affected are those imported by GST-registered business, who are some of our largest retailers. Imports by businesses with approved trader status, other smaller businesses and individuals would all be impacted and impacted significantly. Consignments imported by individuals, which are currently only detained on arrival in the island from within the Customs Union if no value is declared, or if they exceed the de minimis, and therefore released once value is confirmed and GST is paid as needed, would require a full declaration using the goods codes to ascertain their GST liability. Undoubtedly, this would lead to more consignments being detained and disruption to the public. We receive complaints on a daily basis at Customs and Immigration about clearing GST on regular goods. For those who operate small business but who are not GST registered or approved traders, the current position is that all goods are currently detained and released on payment of duty. If GST were to be zero rated on import, a full declaration of each food item would therefore be required in line with the agreed framework before the consignment could be cleared at all. This is highly likely to increase the administration burden for traders, potentially significantly. The level of detail in the UK VAT framework is such that if Jersey were to adopt the same framework, an extensive library of goods codes would be required, with businesses and individuals would need to navigate to clear all the goods containing foodstuffs. This is not a simple process. I don't want to mention Jaffa cakes again, but for example, flapjacks, under one goods code are 0 rated, but cereal or muesli bars require a different goods code and are liable for VAT. A caramel or millionaire shortcake is 0 rated under one goods code, but a shortbread, which is partly or wholly covered in chocolate, is liable for VAT under a separate goods code. You know, these are just a couple of simple examples involving biscuits. They're certainly not exhaustive, but they are indicative of some of the massive complexities of the UK system. As the responsible minister, if I was challenged by a frustrated member of the public or commercial importer, I have to admit I'd find this hard to defend. I acknowledge the needs in our community that have inspired the proposer to bring this forward. We must find a way of providing help to those who need it with the rising cost of living. The mini budget has gone some way to do that, as has the rise in the minimum wage. And I commend the proposer for her commitment to seeking solutions to the most vulnerable in our community. But I cannot support this proposition, not because I don't care, not because I don't understand the ethical arguments. Of course I do. But I can't support it because I do not believe that the benefit it may bring comes close to justifying the additional costs and significant disruption to the public or business. Whether we were to adopt the UK framework or devise another framework, it's highly unlikely that this can be implemented without introducing additional cost, disruption, and significant complexity to the process of importing goods containing food. I ask members to think carefully about the wide and various unintended consequences that could arise from this proposition before voting today. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Sullivan.
Thank you, sir. And I rise as the latest contributor to this debate, having seen this debate 1, 2, 3, 4 times perhaps, including arguments about Jaffa cakes and biscuits, which have by and large all been solved by the UK regime. And therefore, to adopt the regulations of the UK is a simple process indeed. And the first thing I think I want to say, and I remind members, because it's important, it's vital in fact, to this discussion, is that GST is a regressive tax. It has a proportionately higher impact on those with low incomes than it does on those with high incomes. And the Council of Ministers, with their comments on pages 4 and 5, pretend that it is not so, that somehow we are being generous to those who are wealthiest. But examination of the figures reveals a different matter of fact. If you look at the top 20% of our population, the average income is around £135,000. Approximately six times what the average income in the lowest quintile, the lowest 20% is. It's a ratio of 6 to 1. So 6 times richer at the top end of our distribution than at the bottom end. And what does this mean? This means on average, I, for example, spend something like £152 a week on food. I'd probably spend even more than that. What happens at the bottom end of the scale? How much do you think is spent on average on food at the bottom end of the scale? It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer it. But I'll let you know. It's £60 per week. And just imagine for a minute having to exist, once you've paid all your bills and you pay your rent, on £60 a week. Week in, week out. Could you manage it? I doubt whether most people in this room could actually manage that. We'd be in debt straight away. And indeed, that is the case for people on the island. And part of that is that they're paying GST on food. A moral issue as well as a tax issue. Remember, as Deputy Tadier reminded us, where's the origin? What's the origin of GST? It's to replace tax on companies with tax on individuals. It was a deliberate policy by the last Council of Ministers, or way before that, the regime, I should call them, the previous regime, deliberate policy to transfer as much tax as possible from businesses to individuals. And that's indeed what they did, and this is part of that change. And I'm told that apart from the people who voted for change in town, most of whom I can see here, there was a tremendous move for change in the last, as a result of the last election, in the country parishes as well. The entire island voted for change. So what are we going to do about this last remnant of tax policy from the old regime? Are we going to actually follow up and change it? Or are we going to chicken out once more? But this is an issue that I believe we should be taking hold of and should be first on the list for change. Why? Because it's regressive and it affects the lowest paid more than the top end. And just to deal with one more point, we are told, we were threatened yesterday with the black hole, another black hole, we've seen them come and go, but this black hole, a black hole produced by removing tax, GST, from food. Oh, we couldn't possibly do that, it'd be a tremendous black hole. No, they won't. The figures in the proposition, and indeed in the comments on from the Council of Ministers, shows that if we just leave things alone, then GST as a whole will increase year on year because of inflation. What's inflation going to do in the near future? It's going to go bonkers. We're expecting 12%, maybe more. So the gap, the £10 million that we're giving up in GST returns, will be eaten away fairly rapidly. The Council of Ministers says it won't be quick enough. It's going to take ages. The reality that I fear, and I think it will become reality, is that inflation will continue at substantially high rates for some time before things smooth out. And that, in fact, that gap, that hole, that black hole, will be filled relatively easily by GST that's still enacted on other issues. And I believe that's why we can fairly safely say, after all these years, it's okay to remove GST from food. Let's take the tax bill out of people's mouths, as Deputy Tadier so graphically told us.
St John.
Thank you, sir. So I should start by saying, assuring the Constable of St Helier that I and the rest of my colleagues on the State Employment Board were as surprised as him to read the JEP last night with that headline. Sir, the proposer gave a detailed speech in her introduction, as well as an excellent report, and included the Consumer Council, freight charges, and the JCRA in her opening. Sir, I've been surprised in the difference in prices for the same product from some local retailers published by the Consumer Council, and like others would encourage members of the public to look at this valuable tool. Only last night when I got home, we discussed how much more we now shop around rather than getting all of our goods from one supermarket as we had done for many, many years. So in terms of freight costs, this is an area that we need to have real focus as it impacts not only on food, but on all goods. Members may not be aware, but the price differential on the Condor rate card is significant. I'm now told that it's approaching £250 per trailer for somebody who ships goods from Portsmouth to Jersey compared to the dominant player. That's £250 for every trailer somebody else brings in, they pay more. This is not good for competition. We have one major ferry company and one dominant freight company, and it's not just the price of food that it affects, but it affects all goods on the island. The Constable of St Saviour mentioned the impact of GST on diesel and the impact on delivery costs. Well, he, like most members, may also be surprised that the current fuel surcharge for a return trailer on Condor is currently just over £300 per trailer. Yes, logistics companies are paying £300 a trailer or £11.53 a pallet. This whilst Brittany Ferries charge just under £100 for a similar crossing. That is a £200 difference or £7.69 on each and every pallet. I'd like to ask the Economic Minister to look at both of these things before signing any new ramp licence. I'd also like to ask the Treasury Minister to work with Ports of Jersey to limit any increases on harbour dues. I'm informed by industry that they fear a double-digit increase.
I do regret to interrupt you, but could you perhaps explain why this relates to GST on food?
So we're talking about the cost of living, the price of food, sir, and these things impact directly on the cost.
Do they impact on the advisability of keeping or removing GST?
I'm going to get there, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir, freight costs, including fuel surcharges and harbour dues, all get passed on to the consumer, not just on food, but on all goods imported. The JCRA have today confirmed that they are going to undertake a market study looking into the grocery sector. So I hope that review will bear more fruit than the recent freight review that appeared to ignore the facts I stated earlier about the difference in costs to providers. So the Home Affairs Minister spoke about the CESA system, and my experience is at the other end of the system as an importer and exporter, and I concur with her comments. I would respectfully suggest that the additional requirements may be too much for the existing system. The detailed report attached to the proposition confirmed one thing for me, and that is we need to help the less well-off, target the support to those who need it most. In closing, sir, I would hope the Treasury Minister has heard the various points about the different income opportunities and that he and the Council of Ministers will consider these during this term. Thank you.
St Martin.
Thank you, sir. And I'm going to even annoy myself by saying I was trying really hard not to speak in this debate, but I just have to. I see a huge hypocrisy with this government. On one hand, they're saying there's absolutely no money to assist the poorest in our community by removing GST. And then, lo and behold, they find £225,000 to pay a UK consultant £225,000 plus expenses for working 3 days a week. So that's including his hotel and his food. Where is the money coming from? And what message is the government giving us? I've deeply considered both sides and have been unsure, but I will be voting with Deputy Kovac because I believe it is morally wrong to tax food, and I do believe we can find the money somewhere. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak in this debate? If no other member wishes to... Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, it has been an interesting debate so far. And I think in this debate, we've also identified how we agree on so many things. We agree that we all agree that a growing number of middle-income households are facing a difficult time. We all agree that we want to deliver timely and targeted measures to support those families and households and those on lower incomes as well, because times are challenging. We know that and we understand that. But that's why, on the 2nd of August this year, this government lodged a mini-budget. It was debated on the 21st of September, and we're really grateful to everyone in this Assembly who supported that mini-budget. That mini-budget was a £56 million package, a package that offered targeted and timely measures, measures that will not benefit higher earners, they will support lower and middle earners through a suite of measures meeting all of those groups and helping them with their needs, whatever the needs within their particular household. That meant a minimum wage rise to £10.50, 50 pence higher than the Reform Jersey proposal, which was £10, obviously. And 12% increase of tax allowances so that nobody pays tax on earnings until they are receiving £18,550. We've doubled the community cost bonus to £516. And yes, thanks to Deputy Feltham's extension and the Assembly's agreement, that is now extended to those who pay a small amount of tax, up to £2,700. We've also doubled the COLTS payments for those who are on income support, and we've also provided more money for the Consumer Council to provide their price check information. And just last week, they identified the huge difference in the cost of a litre of fuel in the island, which is 30 pence, depending on the garage that you choose to fill up your car if you're still running a car on petrol. So what we want to do is pass on a tax cut, not to the higher earning households who consume more and are less impacted by the cost of living. We do oppose this proposition not because we don't care about those who are struggling and the cost of living, but because it is neither timely nor targeted, sir. It's a proposition that will not come into effect until 2024. So we too listen and meet with islanders. We speak to islanders. We've been out to meet groups such as the Citizens Advice, Jersey Consumer Council, the Grace Trust, the Salvation Army, and so many more. We are connected and we understand that there is a cost to a great number of members in our community in these challenging times. This, sir, neither is a debate about personalities. I think that would be a very sad route to go down. And I have found it slightly disappointing to hear those suggestions, actually. Every member in this Assembly, as we identified yesterday, is here for a single goal, and that is to simply serve our community to our best endeavours. We all have some slight differences in how we achieve that, and that is the purpose of debate. And it is not necessary to play the person. As the Minister for Environment so eloquently said in yesterday's debate, let's play the policy. So, and there are a small number of members in the Council of Ministers who have campaigned to remove GST from food in the past, as Deputy Labby reminded us earlier. She herself has been so convinced by the measures, there are others, although she is not convinced, there are others in the Council of Ministers who have become convinced that the measures that we've brought forward so far do provide enough support to those islanders who need it most, and they will be supporting the Council of Ministers today and voting against this well-intended proposition. There have also been comparisons with the United Kingdom, and they're, of course, quite unwise, as Deputy Balash and others have outlined. Not only did the last United Kingdom government announce its mini-budget 6 weeks after we did, and we all know what happened after that. But up there, luxury food items such as caviar aren't subject to VAT, but of course their VAT rate is significantly higher. than ours. And we certainly do not want to have to consider, as an assembly, increasing GST to a higher rate on other goods if we are put in a position where we have to compensate for the removal of GST on food. Deputy Scott yesterday reminded us that the FPP have given clear advice, and they say that that includes protecting and growing our reserves to benefit future generations. And in agreeing our common strategic policies yesterday, those future generations and ensuring that we're a community where everyone can thrive is very much at the heart of what brings us all here together and drives us forward in our policy making. So if we're swayed by this proposal, we would have to increase GST on other products, or an increase in another charge or duty, which, due to market conditions, might not raise enough cash. We simply don't know. Some have mentioned, Sir, and I think it's important to respond to the proposition that was successful last year to remove GST from sanitary products. It's really important to make it absolutely clear that that proposition didn't use the GST mechanism to do so. It had found a better way. However, since joining government, and it wasn't a debate about whether to it wasn't a debate to remove GST from sanitary products and offer them for free. That would have been utterly pointless. It was simply a debate to remove GST. And it was that debate that did encourage the government to come forward and say, OK, fine, we'll find a way of making them free. And that is now what we are doing. And we will, in the government plan, remove the commitment to removing GST from sanitary products because we have made them available for free in our mini budget. So the Constable of St Helier spoke very eloquently as ever, and he is quite right that we must have a greater focus on public spending. That's why we have a value for money project within our government plan. And I can tell the Assembly that there are certainly strong challenges these days when contracts come to the State's Employment Board, and we take great care when thinking about employing more people. Because as the Home Affairs Minister explained, this measure will raise the staffing costs. So I encourage the Constable to think again. Deputy Sutherland suggested that using UK rules is simple. Well, we've rehearsed the constitutional issues and the impact upon our customs officers. Then we have to also think about the increasing amount of trade that we're doing with our southern neighbours, thanks to the excellent work of Deputy Morrell. So what would we have to do with them? A completely different set of rules. So our focus is on ensuring that those who are providing our critical services, health and education, are able to thrive in our community and enjoy a good quality of life. And I would suggest to members, Sir, that they enable us to do that. And that means being able to deliver additional cash in that area. As the Environment Minister reminded us, the focus of this Council of Ministers is to focus on raising household incomes so that they can make their own choices rather than trying to manipulate prices. The proposal costs a lot but delivers a little, he said, and I encourage members to keep that at the forefront of their minds. That doesn't mean that you're not caring. That means that we are thinking sensibly, pragmatically, but showing that those members of our community who have told us that they are struggling and worried are in our thoughts and actually in our actions. But let's help by targeting and delivering for people now and when they need it, not offering a little gesture that will arrive in a year's time. We're small as an island, Sir, and we have to be pragmatic and focused. That pragmatism is what has stood us well for many decades and centuries even. That's why we stand today in a strong position. That's why we could deliver a £56 million mini budget which offered targeted support to those who need it and maintained a balanced budget. Yesterday, we agreed for our focus to be on Jersey being a community where everyone can thrive. These times are challenging for many, and we know that we must support our main industry to thrive in order to continue to generate the employment opportunities and the revenue that it brings us. By offering targeted, careful, and caring measures, sir, we can best deliver for those in our community who need it most. This isn't a choice about pragmatism or morality. Sir, I choose both. Thank you.
Chief Minister. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I wish to support the points that have been made so well by the Minister for Treasury and Resources in our debate yesterday. As an Assistant Treasury Minister, I must emphasise the significance of the potential loss of income if this measure is adopted today. The government plan will be debated next month, and this will show a financial position that is only just balanced by the end of 2025. A reduction in annual income of £10 million cannot be absorbed without some other action. Deputy Kovacs does not adequately explain how she would bridge this funding gap. Without an increase in income, that is taxes, there will need to be a reduction in government expenditure. There is no coherent plan on the table to make up the shortfall. I cannot support a decision which could lead to cuts in existing services in order to accommodate a reduction in future income. Turning to the households who will see the most benefit from this proposal. The households with the highest incomes will see the greatest benefit from the proposed reduction in GST. For every pound saved by a bottom quintile household, a top quintile household will be better off by over £2.50. Somewhat ironic, I think, given some of the comments we've heard this morning. This is not the way to target government support. Considering my role as a Minister for Social Security, I will briefly remind members, that there are existing mechanisms in place to compensate for the inclusion of food within the GST regime. These compensations have been available since 2008 and continue to be included within the tax and benefit systems. Income tax allowances were increased in 2008, and these increases are now baked into the income tax system. Income support allowances were increased in 2008 and again in 2011. Again, these increases are baked into the income support system. 2008 also saw the introduction of an annual bonus designed to provide compensation to those households who neither paid income tax nor received income support. This annual payment is now known as the Community Cost Bonus. The original value of this payment was directly linked to the annual cost of GST on food. Should this bonus scheme now be withdrawn if GST is removed from food? Assuming that food inflation stops now, which we can't, assuming that the benefit is passed on by retailers, which is a big assumption, the benefit to a low-income household is £150 per year. In 2021, the value of the bonus stood at £258.25. As part of the mini-budget, as alluded to by the Chief Minister, we have doubled this payment to £516 and increased its scope to some taxpayers as a one-off measure for 2022. I would, however, like to correct and update some of the comments made by Deputy Kovacs yesterday about Community Cost Bonus and the application process. If Deputy Kovacs took the time to get her phone out and look on gov.je/ccb, she will see that the application process for Community Cost Bonus is, in fact, very, very simple. As Deputy Ferry mentioned, we have also spoken to food banks, and on our visit to a food bank last week, we have, I hope, persuaded them and shown them the application form on their PC in the office that it is so simple that they should be able to sit down with those of the people they help to help them apply for a Community Cost Bonus. It is simply not a difficult application process. The fact that at the time Deputy Kovacs looked at numbers there was a delay is possibly due to the fact that we have had a very significant uplift in numbers of applications this year, and also the added complexity of Deputy Feltham's amendment means that rather than simply saying yes or no, this household does not pay tax, the tax authorities are having to go away and calculate household tax revenue to confirm whether or not the household is eligible for the bonus. Just to come on to the figures, as at yesterday's date, 3,900 applications have been received. That is almost 4 times the number of households that benefited last year. 3,700 households have been paid community cost bonus for this year. 200 are in process. 200 out of almost 4,000 are still in process. All claims up to 13th of November have been paid. It is a simple application process. A new community cost bonus will be developed for 2023. This will continue to fully support households from the cost of GST on food when they don't pay tax and don't receive income support. When they pay a small amount of tax. That will be reviewed for next year. We have committed to a scheme to be rolled out in January 2023, which will help those families who have under 5 years residency. In summary, these areas provide well-targeted support to Jersey households and were agreed at the time as an appropriate response to the need to include food within the GST regime to ensure that the tax system remains broad, low and simple. Shortly after my election as Social Security Minister, I was faced with the challenge of helping to devise a mini-budget at great speed. I am proud of the scheme that was put together in August and approved by the States in September. This has provided immediate targeted support to local households for the autumn and winter and extra support through both the income tax system and the income support system from January 2023. I will also be developing a new community cost bonus for 2023 and will announce those plans as soon as possible. The Government is not waiting until 2024 to address the challenges facing households today. It has already taken decisive and positive action and will continue to do so. I would also like to just comment briefly on the implications for our law of adopting the UK system. Deputy Balash has given us a very clear and, if I may say, concise discussion on the implications as a matter of constitutional law for adopting UK law. Deputy Tadei, who I believe is not a lawyer, says we can just discount those as being irrelevant. I will simply remind this House that Deputy Balash is a lawyer, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying, of very many years' experience. He has held all of the top legal jobs in this island, and there are very few Jersey advocates who would dare to suggest that their knowledge of constitutional law comes close to approaching his. I'm certainly not one of them, and I would simply ask this House to be very careful in disregarding his advice. I would also just like to comment on what the UK law says about VAT on food. And I can do so relatively quickly. If anybody's actually read Appendix A, which is on page 21, it describes value-added tax on food like this. Food, VAT. The supply of anything comprised in the general items set out below, except a supply in the course of catering. That has its own challenges, which we will discuss here. And B, a supply of anything comprised in any of the accepted items set out below, unless it is also comprised in any of the items overriding the exception set out below, which relates to that accepted item. So basically, it's in, unless it's out, unless it's in. How straightforward is that? In my previous role, I was often asked to review draft orders to be granted by the Jersey court. Those often came from English firms, essentially with review by Jersey lawyers, and sought permission for UK liquidators to exercise their powers in Jersey. Those draft orders would often say something along the lines of the liquidator could could use all of the powers available to him or her under Section 226, and I'm guessing, of the Insolvency Act. And I always resisted that on the basis that, in my opinion, and it's my opinion, sir, only, that if a Jersey court is going to make an order that is going to be served on a person living in Jersey and is going to be valid and binding in Jersey, the person who receives that order should be able to understand what that order means without having to seek English law advice. So I used to always say, well, you must set out in full what those powers are. Because taking Jersey law advice is one thing, but taking UK law advice to understand a Jersey court order, to me, is completely inappropriate. And I think what adopting the UK system would do is not just requiring businesses to take legal advice. There's nothing wrong with businesses taking legal advice from Jersey lawyers, because let's remember, Jersey lawyers charge GST on their fees, and they pay income tax, and I'd hope quite a handsome amount of tax on their handsome incomes. So the island benefits. Adopting this proposal would be pushing Jersey businesses and Jersey individuals to seek UK legal advice. It would also be pushing government to seeking UK legal advice. And we all know how much, to the Connotables have referred to it this morning, we all know how much the public does not like government going to UK consultants. And I can tell you, if you think a medical professional is expensive, just wait till you see the costs of a UK specialist tax lawyer. So, in brief, sir, I ask members to reject this proposition and to support the Council of Ministers in their ongoing, targeted and timely response to the cost of living crisis. Thank you.
Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I would like to thank Deputy Kovacs for bringing this proposition for debate. The diligence she has shown in putting together her report and addressing every potential risk or issue has been outstanding and something that we all need to aspire to, including ministers. I wanted to focus my input in this debate on core principles, as this is a decision of policy. However, unfortunately, due to some of the rhetoric we have heard, I find myself discussing some administrative aspects that really should be addressed by the civil service once the Assembly has given its direction. I will repeat what I said earlier in the week. It is our role to lead. So, if you are a minister that is about to or has read out a speech prepared by an officer, I hope that you have checked that what you say reflects your values and that you have done enough due diligence yourself to know that what you are saying is factual and accurate. I want to address some of the comments made by Deputy Gorst yesterday. Now, the Chief Minister, I can see the Chief Minister about to press a button.
So I was thinking of a point of order. I think the Deputy did make some assertions about the potential behaviours of some people in the civil service who may or may not have written speeches, and I wasn't quite sure whether that was very appropriate.
I didn't hear anything that was overtly critical. I think the Deputy merely said it's for the members of this Assembly to lead, and that if any speech has been written or presumably contributed to by officers, then hopefully the person who has delivered the speech has satisfied themselves that it reflects their values.
So I think it was the reference to factually accurate, and I think that is what causes me some issue.
I have to say I didn't hear a criticism there. I simply heard a statement that if someone is presented with a list of facts, they might wish to check some of them. That's actually all I heard. But was that your intention, Deputy Felton?
Yes, absolutely. It was to
It wasn't suggesting anyone would be deliberately inaccurate.
No, I wasn't. I was suggesting that perhaps ministers should do the same amount of due diligence that Deputy Kovacs has done.
I hope that's factual. Yes. Yes, please carry on.
Thank you, sir. I wish to address some of the comments made by Deputy Gorst yesterday by the Chief Minister today, and Deputy Miller, the Minister for Social Security as well, as much of their argument focused on the definition of food, which the proposition has suggested should be taken, although it actually gives some flexibility. It says that the UK VAT definition should be used as a starting point. And the ministers may actually use any other such categorisations that they would like to use. So there is some flexibility there, and I caution members that if they are going to take legal advice, perhaps they should do so from members that have read the detail of the proposition. Why was I so surprised of the minister's criticism of this? Because I was sat in the room when the minister's own officers advised Deputy Kovacs that this would be the simplest definition to use on Ireland. We asked if an all-food definition would be better, whether other countries' definitions may be better, but no. The answer was that it would be far simpler to utilise the work that had already been done and was widely understood. I would have hoped that the ministers had received the same advice from officers. One in particular I will not name, but it was the same officer mentioned by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. I also do not agree with the Treasury Minister's suggestion that using this definition because of a policy decision to take GST off of food would lead us to adopting the UK VAT system lock, stock and barrel. For one, GST and VAT operate differently, but also making certain items zero-rated, reducing or increasing rates are policy decisions that would need to be made by this Assembly. And dare I say it, and the Constable of Grooville is a much better versed person in this, but I'm sure that we could add the flexibility in around Jersey Wonders. The Minister for Treasury and Resources also told us that he doesn't think it would be easy and that other work would have to stop in order to implement this proposition if adopted. Again, Deputy Kovacs and I addressed this in our meeting with the Minister's officers. Both of us having public sector backgrounds, we understand that you cannot just snap your fingers and make things happen, and also that the public sector is under pressure to deliver multiple existing projects and programmes. But we also know that the public sector should respond to the decisions taken by the Assembly. At first, we were given the answer that the Minister seems to be referencing, all about complexity, cost, and administration. As Deputy Kovacs and I have undertaken our lean training, we started asking why. Firstly, it was complex legislation and the time that it would take, which is why Deputy Kovacs I've lost my... So what we did then was ask them to go back and do their workings out. Because surprisingly, the officers couldn't tell us what the cost and the resource implications were. When they came back to us, the figures were actually considerably less than I was expecting, given the resistance we were facing. It was project team to develop law with LDO, create administrative procedures, etc., £60,000. Increased size of GST team by 2 or 3 staff years, £150,000 a year. GST return and IT changes and customs IT, £120,000. Being rather familiar with the government's project management framework and having completed a number of project sizing matrices before, I can confidently say to members that this is not a major government project. In fact, it is the type of project that would be initiated by departments on a regular basis without any ministerial oversight. So, I am at quite a loss as to why ministers are taking such a large interest in this component of the proposition. They might wish to request a full list of all projects currently being undertaken by their departments, so they can do a compare and contrast on the public value provided by those. I was also surprised by the speech made by the Assistant Chief Minister with responsibility for technology. I thought this government was elected on a mandate for change. So to hear him continue the previous government's mantra that the computer says no is disappointing. I would hope that this Assembly can move away from the technological determinism that constrained the previous one, and that this new Assistant Chief Minister would lead the way in technology-enabling change, and more importantly, technology being developed that can react nimbly to the policy decisions of government and this Assembly. Where I do agree with him is when he suggests that tax policy can be improved. For me, the removal of GST on food is one such improvement. What we are making today is a policy decision, not an administrative one. What is the policy that should be adopted when it comes to raising revenue, and whether the government should be raising revenue by taxing essential food items? If adopted, the financial implications of loss of revenue will not start until 2023. The government has ample time and opportunity within next year's government planning process to bring forward progressive changes to tax policy to replace this lost revenue. The Assistant Chief Minister suggested some. Deputy Kovac also suggested some. Our party would also bring forward some that are aligned to our manifesto. Our tax policy is clear, and it was clear when we stood for election. Let's be blunt about this. Government sees people purchasing basic food items as a revenue raiser. And in times of increased food costs, such revenue to the government will increase. That is more money out of people's pockets. Today, we are making a policy decision, not an administrative one. It's a policy decision about whether government should raise revenue when people buy basic food items. In making this decision, we individually need to consider our values and whether this is the way that government should raise revenue, or if, get your bingo cards out, there is a better way. I don't believe that people should be taxed on their basic food basket, and we should bring more progressive measures to raise the revenue in the next year. I urge you to support this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So the Chair often has difficulty with members introducing or repeating arguments, and I'm certainly going to try and introduce a new reason why members should not vote for this proposition. So I, as members will recall, I'm somewhat of a veteran of GST exemption debates. We've had 8 of them. At the last time I was looking at the numbers. I was known to be one of those speakers. We think affectionately of the late great Constable of St Clement and his rum baba speeches. We speak of Jaffa cakes and we've heard of tea cakes. These are not laughing matters, sir. They are actually real. I would remind members that following those debates, those well-intentioned debates, which I have no doubt Deputy Kovacs of St Saviour, I'm wearing my St Saviour's badge here, is bringing. I understand that there are many members of this Assembly that have a moral issue with it. However, it also should be remembered, sir, that the equivalent of GST on food and other essential items has been given back to taxpayers in forms of wider tax allowance, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. It was given back in terms of income support payments, which were permanently raised. It's also been given by, and I reflect memorably, for the work of the former Deputy Le Fondre in bringing forward that very GST bonus that was now called the community cost bonus, which under the leadership of our Chief Minister has now been massively increased. The cost of GST for essential items has already been baked in to people's incomes. They've already had it, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but more than that. And the mini budget, as the Chief Minister and Treasury Minister have said, has done that just thing. So I was out of the Assembly, and I apologise. I was on a conference call with Greg Hands, the Minister for Trade, trying to advance our interests in trade as the UK tried to extend their goods to try and lower the cost of living by treating trade deals. The meeting went reasonably well. And I didn't hear the contributions of some members, but I know that some members have spoken, particularly, no doubt, Deputy Balash, on the issue of the legal exemptions. Deputy Feltham said that VAT exemptions would be the simplest way of dealing with it. They're not that simple. It's just the least word option, I say to Deputy Feltham. It is the least worst option. The least worst option of a very, very, and it is not overplayed, it is not overstated, it is an administrative nightmare. And I note with interest, sir, that the Co-op, an interesting organisation, is the one that's actually saying they're going to lower, bring forward their costs of GST right through to their consumers. Well done, the Co-op. But I would point out very respectfully, sir, but the Co-op doesn't pay tax. On the Consumer Council website, have they got lower food prices because they don't pay 20% tax? I don't think so. And that's the point, is that goods are priced at the price which the customer will bear. And it's about competition. So, well done, Co-op, but come on, bring down your prices because you don't pay tax. The others do, you don't. Sorry about that. And when we say that the Deputy talks about complexity, the least simple, she said actually, I think in her remarks, and I absolutely accept them, that we want to have this Assembly involved in those exemptions. Are we really going to start having debates about wonders? I'm not sure. I've actually asked whether or not wonders under the UK rules would be in or out. What about black butter? Are we going to start having debates about whether or not GST is involved or in or out? Is this Assembly actually going to start, as Deputy Feltham seems to suggest, about whether or not it's going to be in or out of this vital foods? So let's not go there. It is not an underestimate to say that the legal challenge route would be a complete waste of public money. It would be a complete waste of the legal fees that would be incurred by the retailers. And what happens, sir? Companies don't pay tax. Ultimately, it is the employees, it is the owners, unlikely in case of the Co-op, as we've heard, or it is going to be the consumers that pay. Increased costs, increased complexity, that's going to make competition worse. It is not something that I think has been raised in the force that members would expect me to, but I want to see more competition and lower prices in our grocery market. The threat of new local cost retailers, and yes, sir, in the UK, I'm a proud customer of Aldi and Lidl, even the lower cost operators. They're the ones in the UK that are lowering prices, and they're not just doing, and before somebody says, oh, they don't want to go to, they prefer Waitrose to Aldi, it is the arrival of those low-cost retailers in the UK and now Aldi's 4th position in the market that has driven down costs of groceries across the board. Have we got a Lidl and Aldi or the other ones in Jersey? No, we have not. The front page of the JP today shows empty shelves. Well, I'm working with my colleague, the Minister for Economic Development, who's not here. He wants to get more retailers from France. Do you know what, sir? There's an Aldi and a little in St Marlow and Granville. Let's get those low-cost retailers. Let me petition nicely the Environment Minister and the planning panel to see whether we can find a site that we can get one of those low-cost retailers in Jersey. It is the threat of competition that drives down prices. And, by the way, it's going to be a lot easier to get those retailers in if we can say there's no complex VAT rules. If we get them in from France, who have different rules, it's going to be a lot easier. Low, broad and simple, we're going to be able to tell these retailers, please come in, please come and compete and drive down the cost of retailers in Jersey. I have been astonished in this assembly over the 19 years that I was here when the Aldi, do members remember the purchase of Asda, a low-cost supermarket, 8 hours before the competition law was brought in by the then CI traders? 8 hours. Why did they do that? Because they wanted to infringe competition. They wanted to stop what would have otherwise been something that would have actually meant that competition would have been narrower. And I say, and I still say, I was outraged by the fact it was 8 hours before that competition law came in. The law did make a difference. When CI Traders was brought and taken over by Sandpiper, we then had different, and now we do have a more retail, vibrant market. We've got Waitrose, Morrison's, M&S, and the Co-op. But I must say, sir, that in my absence, there seems to have been a bit of a lack of oomph in the last assembly in relation to competition matters. I certainly am looking forward to working with Deputy Morel with his oomph for getting in lower cost retailers from France. I think we can do it, sir. And I think we can do it, and we will benefit island consumers. If I could take all of the time that officials are going to have to take in introducing a complex system of VAT exemptions on food, which apparently actually are going to be changed because we're going to have decisions made in this assembly about it. If we could bottle that time and put it into attracting low-cost retailers, of which have not one, that's going to drive down prices, sir. The cost of groceries, not just food, is a real cost of families. In the United Kingdom, in France, across the European Union, and it is particularly acute in our island. We don't have one single cost retailer. I'd look forward to Deputy Kovac's summing up. Does she think that reducing the cost of food by removing GST food exemptions, if she'd like to use her absolute enthusiasm as a very valuable St Saviour deputy to bring in more competition, I think that that's going to make a real difference to working families, those people who are struggling at the cost of living. But of course they are better off because of the good work of our mini budget under the leadership of the Chief Minister and Treasury Minister and Social Security Minister. Unlike the UK, we brought a mini budget in which was costed and affordable, and I've got no doubt that the Council of Ministers, as we deal with a cost of living inflation crisis, which is probably not over, that we're going to have to do more, and we're going to be alert to doing more. We're going to have to do it. And it's by having competition. But also, I'm delighted to have the support of the Constable of St Helier in this matter. Of course, that's very valuable. He did, of course, say that he opposed GST when it came in. He was right. But I would also say, very respectfully, before we need to rewrite history, that if we didn't have that GST, it's not a magic money tree. It's money that's going into frontline services. Would we have the kind of ability to put money in our health service if we didn't have that GST? I respectfully ask members to look at Guernsey. Look at their recent numbers. Are they going to have to introduce GST? They've put it off for 5 or 6 years, not a matter for this assembly, but they now have an annual deficit, according to a report I read yesterday, of £220 million. So I have the battle scars of GST. I was the member who had to actually say I had different figures given to me after I was elected in the raising of GST. Deputy Mezek may laugh, sir. It is no laughing matter for a Treasury Minister to come in to see public finances numbers, which I was told, oh no, you can take it from the Strategic Reserve. Where would we be today if we wouldn't have made those courageous decisions? And actually, when you look at inflation, and actually look at when inflation came in, Did it actually get all passed on? No, it didn't. That's the striking thing. That's the striking thing about when we brought in GST. It didn't actually all get passed on. What matters is competition. I understand the moral arguments that many members have, but I ask them, I implore them, let us keep our system of GST low, broad and simple. We will be more successful in targeting benefits in the way that we've done so in the past, and we will be also more successful in bringing those low-cost retailers to Jersey that will lower the cost of living, that will deliver better value for those working families, which the Deputy and all members of this Assembly, whether a constable or a deputy, we know that the cost of living is a problem. We've known it for years and we need to do something about it. So I hope that my zeal, my long-standing position, the very reason why I stood to this Assembly in 1999 about competition is back. And it's back with enthusiasm and determination. We are not well served in competition areas. We've got to do more work, and putting the energy behind that is going to deliver far more with respect to the Deputy than taking GST off food as a symbolic item, which again, I'm also absolutely not convinced at all will lower the cost of food in those other businesses. It's only the Co-op, I hear, that has been advancing this. They've done that from the start. There are other retailers that are concerned. I've spoken to them. I know that. I'm not having a conversation with Deputy Kovacs, sir. I've spoken to them, and they don't want that complexity. I don't want that complexity. It's a waste of money, and we can do better. We can do better for our island community by lowering and sending a clear signal. We're determined to lower the cost of living by having more competition. It's the threat of competition that works, and let's send a clear message out. Low, broad and simple, let's do that, not go with what I'm afraid is a seriously failed and I'm afraid incredibly expensive proposition, both to the taxpayer who's going to have to administer it and the retailers that are going to have to administer it, and that's just going to go on higher costs. I'm sorry, sir, I cannot, as I've done in the last 8 debates, support an exemption on food.
Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I'm delighted to follow that speech. Deputy Joseph spoke about the rewriting of history. So let's be clear about the history of GST. In a few weeks' time, this regressive tax will have existed for 15 years. And if you could sum up the history of that tax with one word, it would be this word: failure. GST did not achieve what it was set out to achieve. GST was introduced at the time that 010, hard truths obviously hurt, sir. GST was introduced to fill the black hole created by the introduction of 010, and it failed to do so. It failed to do so at its outset, which is why a few years later it had to be increased from 3% to 5%, in stark contrast to the manifesto commitments of the Treasury Minister at the time. Perhaps he thinks that's the point I was about to make. And, sir, a few years later, we discover the black hole in public finances still existed, and so from 2014 we had... And so from 2014, I understand we're barely core, it's not like we're debating anything important or anything. So the black hole that it further led to in public finances from 2014 led to the austerity package that government cruelly imposed on some of the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society. You know, we can talk about all the rebates that were provided through some benefits, but that £10 million cut in support to the poorest people in Jersey was particularly vicious, and it was evidenced to have been vicious by the work that was done by Statistics Jersey in looking at rates of relative poverty in Jersey. So the tax was a complete failure. And it was always going to be a failure. Many people saw that at the time, some of those voices still in this Assembly. What we saw with the introduction of GST was a removal of tax from corporate profits. The key word there being profits, sir. If you're a business that's not doing so well at a particular time and not making profit, you don't pay it. It's only on those that make profit, so it's progressive. Taking tax off of those succeeding businesses and instead putting that tax on people's basic living expenses, which we have seen the impact on through various reports that have been produced for this Assembly about how the tax take has changed over those last 15 years, taking it away from those most able to pay it and putting it on those least able to pay it. Sir, the Dean spoke yesterday, not landing on either side of this debate, which of course is appropriate as an unelected member of this Assembly, but he did encourage us to keep bringing forward propositions aimed at trying to help the vulnerable. I can give him our assurance that we'll certainly try to do that. But when he said those words, it reminded me of a Brazilian bishop whose name I had to Google to remind myself of from the 1980s, Helder Camara, who said, when I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor are hungry in the first place, they call me a communist. And I think this gets to the attitude that the government seems to have, which is that if we want to help the vulnerable in our society, rather than finding the root causes of the hardship that they're facing, we'll just throw more benefits at them. We'll just increase the benefits bill, and bear in mind that some of those benefits, at least, are funded through regressive taxation, where the middle earners proportionately pay the higher rates because we have caps that apply to the highest earners. And so we find ourselves as a society more and more where those in the middle who pay the highest tax rates are taxed more and more, so we can fund a greater benefits bill for people on the lowest incomes, rather than trying to address the root causes of why many of them may find themselves financially vulnerable. And I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I have no hesitation whatsoever in voting to support increasing the benefits bill when it's necessary. There have been times in recent years where it's been unfashionable to do so, and I've wholeheartedly opposed cuts to the benefits bill. But are we really saying we think that that's the appropriate direction of travel, to have a group of people in our society who become more and more reliant on benefits being paid out, rather than to support them with genuine financial independence, a genuine ability to manage their own lives through their work and paying their bills because we address those bills as being affordable in the first place. I think as a long-term strategy, that is very problematic, and it will continue to see that further squeeze on Middle Jersey that so many of them resent. So questions have been raised about the affordability of this proposition and how it's funded, which I have to say is hugely ironic. The Minister for Social Security spoke about the subsequent years in the government plan which will need to be funded and the knock-on effects that this may have on it. Well, let's remember, sir, that the government plan itself is predicated on several years after 2023 of savings in spending for which not a penny of detail is provided in the breakdown in that government plan, which stands in stark contrast to the recommendations from the Fiscal Policy Panel. But that's okay. It's absolutely okay to say, oh, we'll balance our budgets with this prediction that we'll make these savings without a single line of detail on that, against the own economic advice we're getting. But if somebody dares come up with a proposition to try to remove GST off food, with plenty of alternative suggestions about how that revenue can be raised, oh, we will apply a totally different standard to that argument than to our own. I think that's unacceptable, sir. But I think the argument that has wound me up the most, it's been hinted at a couple of times today by the Chief Minister and yesterday by other members about wanting our debates not to get personal. Well, sir, in politics you have to make decisions, and you have to be accountable for those decisions. And if not even the majority, but perhaps even a minority, don't like the quality of the decisions you make, they have every right to say so, and they have every right to direct their criticism at the people who they believe are responsible. That's not being personal, that's being political, and it's entirely legitimate to do so. I raised one member before who broke an election pledge when he raised GST previously. I think it's legitimate to raise that because it helps inform the public on how they might choose to exercise their democratic franchise in the future. But surely it cuts both ways. If you don't like politics being apparently personal when you're trying to hold people to account for their records, I think you also can't expect to say to members of this assembly that you have to defer to somebody because of their professional background, irrespective of the quality of their arguments. And that is exactly what the Minister for Social Security asked us to do when she referred to Deputy Balash's argument. And so I will not defer to it because his argument was absolute nonsense. And I question whether he had even read the wording of this proposition. He fearmongered and suggested that we were that in adopting this proposition, we would be giving legislative authority to Westminster. That is nonsense for two reasons. The first reason, sir, is because it simply ain't true. What we have before us is not an order in council asking us to extend UK legislation to Jersey. It is a proposition asking us to come up with our own legislation to effect a decision. And look at the wording of what is in the proposition. It doesn't say to adopt the UK VAT legislation. It says what we adopt to be based upon. So that means it will be Jersey law that ultimately governs it. This Parliament remains sovereign in that regard. And then you go further down in the proposition and it says, or such other categorisation identified by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. So we are not, as a simple matter of fact, delegating any authority on the running of our island to another Parliament which is not democratically accountable to us. He was simply wrong to suggest so, and I will not accept an argument put forward by someone when it clearly is at odds with the wording in front of us just because that person happens to be an experienced lawyer previously. It cuts both ways. You can't pray and aid someone's previous career to be personal and expect that to delegitimise other arguments. But of course, the second reason why that fear-mongering is nonsense, sir, is because we actually do it all the time anyway to extend UK legislation to Jersey. This Assembly, very often in the time that I've been here, has voted on orders in Council to have UK legislation extended here. That then gets registered in the Royal Court. We do it by consent, and we do it because sometimes it's beneficial to Jersey to do so. So I will not accept that argument for one moment. The Home Affairs Minister spoke about the significant operational disruption that would be caused to customs if this were to be adopted, which I found most interesting. So I and the proposer of this proposition met last week with a representative from Customs to understand these issues, understand practically what they would involve, and work out what would have to be done to overcome any particular challenges that it might pose. We did that to inform ourselves before this debate, always an important thing to do. But so we did it also because this Assembly may decide to adopt this proposition, and if it does adopt the proposition, it doesn't matter how much you complained before the proposition, you just have to get on with it, accept the decision and get on and deliver it, which is what Customs will have to do. So they will have to have a plan B. And do you know what? I thought the plan B sounded okay by me. There are plenty of ways that they can get around some of these challenges to make it easier to bring goods into the island and have a GST regime on them that allows us to collect the revenue that we ought to be and provides as much convenience as possible to those running customs and to those customers as well buying goods from outside. And there's plenty of things that can be done. And those will be easier, in fact, if we align ourselves as closely as possible to the VAT arrangements, because many of those businesses from outside the island will actually already have processes in place for differentiating between what types of food are chargeable for GST or VAT and which aren't. The benefit of aligning closely with those VAT rules is that a lot of the hard work's already been done. So these questions about Jaffa cakes, these questions about gingerbread people with a chocolate button or whatever on, have already been dealt with elsewhere. Why do they need to be an issue here? The businesses in the UK will already have their processes in place. If they're sending stuff through, you either, if it's going through something like Amazon, you just extend their systems and their billing mechanisms for the regime that already exists for sales internally in the UK to what they do in Jersey. Easy to do. And then when it comes to goods being stopped at the border in Jersey before being released after GST payment, well, I would say as somebody who occasionally has that happen to me, that the system is already a pain. I don't think there's any way of making it not a pain. It's annoying, it's necessary. I don't make that as a criticism, it's just a pain when you're expecting to receive something and then you've got to go through some bureaucracy to get over it. If it's a mixed pantry with some chargeable goods and some non-chargeable goods in it, you'll have to do a drop-down menu where you pick which items in there are chargeable and which aren't. Again, sir, that can be easy to reconcile if you're aligning with the same VAT classifications, because whatever you're ordering from the UK will already know what the regime is, and they can send you an invoice saying, these are the ones with VAT on, these are the ones without. So you hold it up against your drop-down menu, click, 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 done. It'll take a bit longer, but that's it. I would hope actually that some customers would actually be quite pleased for that, even though it will take a few minutes extra in that drop-down menu. It will be because the goods will be cheaper that they're buying. So I'd have thought they'd be pretty pleased with that. Deputy Joseph's comments about competition lowering grocery costs. Of course, in theory, that all makes sense, and I wish him well in attempting to deliver that in Jersey. But I did quickly Google to see what statistical evidence there was about some of the claims he was making, and those were, and that is that at the moment, even with the competition he refers to in the UK, food inflation is the highest it has been on record, so it ain't doing a lot of good up there. I've been completely caught off guard by that clock, sir, so I urge members to support the proposition.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? I close the debate. Call upon Deputy Kovacs to respond.
Thank you, sir. That have definitely been a long debate. I would like to thank all members for their comments and contributions. And I believe that it has been a worthwhile debate and perhaps a subject that we haven't heard the last of just yet. We shall see. Members will be revealed to hear that I will address the generality of comments, which I hope covers points that have been raised. Before going into the main thing I want to say, I want to explain a few points. In the comments paper from the Council of Ministers, they have explained us in a chart on page 4 and 5, how the lowest decile is getting much less than the highest two deciles put together in income if that's happening. What they avoid of saying is that this is considered for all the food, not just the basic food. And of course, when all the food is included, the higher earners will spend more on the luxury items, which are more expensive and will be more revenue if you consider just the amount of money spent. If you look at actually the percentage of the income that people are spending from their salary towards food, the figures are going differently. Plus, also, we're not looking just at the lower decile. We're looking at the middle two ones, which haven't been included at all, because as we all seen in this debate, the middle class is struggling the most, and that category are the ones that are not having enough support. because for lower income ones has always been some sort of benefit, some sort of support so far. Still them are saying on the 0.7 under that chart that although the benefit for higher income household could be partially reduced by only zero rating basic foodstuff. So by that admitting that if we just include the basic foodstuff, the situation is different. So if we do include the low income and the two middle income categories, that's 60% of people that would benefit, and not just the two upper deciles. So that's one point. But as I like the joke with from Lehoc and Letac, I have another joke given about how the accountancy works. It's been said that accountant, if you ask an accountant how much is 1 + 1, they'll ask you, how much do you want to show it? In my accountancy part, will always be 2. I don't know in others. So to go back on explaining a few other points, actually still on this chart, if you take the first decile, not considering just household, but the lower decile has more of a one-person household than the other deciles, then the actual percentage per person spent makes a much bigger difference. So you can see that there's the report not quite right there. What I always like to refer on facts, and as Deputy Feltham said, I did a lot of due diligence. I think the biggest due diligence that was done on this subject since whenever it was brought to this assembly. So I looked into scrutiny reports, into surveys, statistics, assessments that have been done. And one of the scrutiny reports, when these kind of exemptions were brought in discussion by Deputy Seabury, was having quite a very insightful information in there. So I'll quote from there something highlighted from the Melbourne Institute of Statistics in 1998, but carrying those and updated after with the same. Food is a higher share of total expenditure for households with low total expenditure. Households in the lowest quintile spend it's over 0.25% of their total expenditure on food and non-alcoholic beverages, comparing to 13% for those in the highest quintile. Going further, it says expenditure on food expressed as a proportion of income is 4 as high for the poor as for rich. A tax on food will bear 4 times as heavily on the poor as on the rich. Exempting food from taxation greatly increases the progressivity of the tax system. In a study of the effects on inequality of consumption taxes levied are differential rates. A specialist there was saying, found that the exemption of food has the largest effect on the inequality of the net income. Still, I forgot to say at the beginning, which is really relevant, besides the scrutiny work, the actual specialists that have contributed to this, just to add value to the words I'm saying, were brought from, let me just find my words, sorry, 1 second. From senior lecturer in tax, for freelance tax consultant, tax and law policy writer. So it's not just my words saying, and it's an in-depth research on this. So they continue to say in these researches, it is a frequently claimed that the tax on food is not really regressive because high-income households spend 2 or 3 times as much on food as low-income households. This claim involves a misinterpretation of the term regressive. Even though upper-income households may spend a greater absolute amount on a given commodity, a tax on the commodity is regressive whenever the proportion of income spent on the commodity is greater for low income than for high income households. It also states that the differences in the average expenditure on food per person between highest and lowest income households is always going to be greater, and it's a total different figure than what we've been given so far. The sub-panel also noted on those research that the bottom line of, that between the lower income and higher income households, a person that belongs on the large household in quintile 5 and gains the advantage of economics of scale, that person can eat better than a person in the lowest quintile for the same amount of money. In the sub-panel's view, this further emphasizes the regressive nature and of not zero rating food. We're talking around about the complexity and the compliance part that this proposition will enhance. Still from the same report and from the Australian Select Committee, from these experts that were queried and from the panel review, it says, in its main report, the committee concluded that the compliance cost of zero rating food as an issue is grossly overstated. A major study of VAT GST compliance costs by the United Kingdom National Audit Office, cited by I won't say the name, found that the Canadian and United Kingdom VAT systems, which exempted food, had lower compliance costs than the New Zealand system, which fully taxed food. The general impression is clear that there is no huge gross compliance cost burden in countries that zero rate food as compared with countries that do. It would therefore appear from the United Kingdom evidence that the burden on compliance of GST is aggregate and is not unduly serious. Computerization of accounts has the potential to reduce the cost of compliance considerably. This also applies to compliance costs associated with zero rating. Indeed, the president of the New Zealand Employers Federation, in his advice to this Australian counterpart submitted to the committee as part of that chamber discussion, confirms that the computerization reduces the cost even of zero-rated goods. In any event, computers are programmed to calculate the GST at the appropriate rate on data entry. In summary, the committee concludes that the compliance cost of zero-rating food as an issue is grossly overstated, particularly in the context of the huge increase in compliance cost associated with the introduction of GST, which no one talked about. Talking about the UK wholesalers, still from their findings here, and the specialists confirming, it would not be a burden to supply invoices to Jersey companies showing that the fresh produce was zero-rated, and would actually be easier to implement the same systems for cross-collaboration. The same minister said that he believed the pain involved in administering a GST system with zero rating for basic foodstuff would be acceptable because of the social benefits involved if followed the UK system. Also mentioned that after their finding, it would be extremely unlikely for companies on the island to legally contest the definition of zero-rated items. It was explained to the panel that challenges in the UK predominantly came from the manufacturers, and as the zero rating would predominantly affect the island's retails rather than the manufacturers, who are mainly based in the UK, this was not thought to be a potential problem. On top of that, the Treasury Minister was saying that he's willing to do a separate tax tribunal to deal with anything as tax. So that would mean we'll have specialists, we'll have all this information in the background, we'll have a very relevant database to look at that. Plus the UK, as complex system as they say it is, has dealt with most of these complexities already. So they have all the precedents there just to look at it. So that's on this part. Sir, something that has been missing from this debate is that there has been very little mention of the very real issues for me and for the general public, and that is that food prices and food price inflation is at its highest level it's been for over 40 years, and there is no sign of this stopping soon. Has everyone heard, like me, when I've mentioned the 14.7% food inflation from the Kantar UK study, and that their measurements on same items in a shopping basket since 2008 onwards show an increase of 628 if we look at the same products year on year? Also, there has been little comment about how our community are dealing with this. And the answer is that increasing food prices are causing some very real challenges which the benefit the system is not dealing with. I mentioned, sir, in my opening speech that we know charities are having to cope with increasing demand against the background of less being background of less being donated, and that's for the onset of winter. A few days ago, it was announced that the Lions Club of Jersey, three main beneficiaries of the 2023 swim marathon, will be the food banks of the Salvation Army, the Grace Trust, and St. Vincent de Paul. Growth Industries food banks in an international finance center with billions of pounds sloshing about. Does this make members proud or suggest that perhaps we've got some things wrong here? A number of members have mentioned an online petition being poorly supported. Well, there could be good reasons for that. And that is a pen and paper petition in 2007 about the introduction of GST, had almost 20,000 signatures, and states members took no notice. As I said in my introduction, it could be a contributory factor why people don't register to vote. To refer to the low uptake of the most recent petition online, I've picked up on it as soon as it came online. And I got in touch with that lady. And because the wording that she's put in there wasn't just to food and would have made it more complex and complicated, I told her that I'm taking this over. So she doesn't need to promote it anymore. So that's why it hasn't been brought up for the people to see it and take on. But it's also worth to mention that when my proposition was submitted, the JEP did a poll on the same day, and 1,300 people answered over a couple of days, and 86% of those were saying they want the GST of food. Sir, I thought I had given enough examples of how any reduction would be transparent by publicity from traders, oversight by the Jersey Consumer Council, the JCRA, and Statistic Jersey in the retail price index, as well as the general public. This certainly gives me comfort. They have sufficient funding. They said they have that on their schedule for this term. And Jersey is a small enough jurisdiction for this to actually be seen for people to take account on. In their comments on my proposition, the Council of Ministers chose to use the UK example of when changes in VAT were made to period products and this was not fully passed on. This is rather ironic, a bit of an goal really, because then Senator Christina Moore brought a proposition to this assembly which has approved to make all sanitary products exempt from GST and to request the Treasury Minister to issue the law drafting instructions. Interesting, despite the report and proposition then being long on emotion and short on facts, it was approved and none of the issues we've just discussed here were raised at all. Following on from this, they are now to be free. And in the proposed government plan, 1.7 million has been identified for this over the next 4 years. I wonder where from, they found the money, no one questioned. My reason for saying this is that a number of members have suggested that my proposition should have included revenue-raising measures to compensate. However, I don't see any evidence that this happened here, and I can dig out many other examples if it's insisting. So I believe it's legitimate to ask if we have double standards here, rules for the ministers and different rules for the rest of us. Or it always has to be found something to be picked up on, even when not necessary, and then you say you want us to work collaboratively. Is it really like this now, how the Assembly wants to operate? Why can't we all be more solutions-oriented and collaborate constructively and in a timely manner? I'm saying that because I was disappointed about the last-minute meeting invited on Friday by the Treasury Minister to discuss my proposition, when in fact officers there and everyone else in the room was left to believe that I was the one that asked for that meeting. So in fact, nothing had to be discussed because there wasn't any negotiation to look at. My feedback on that to the minister was that these kind of meetings would be good to happen, but much sooner after submission. Mine was about almost 2 months ago. And to be in a more constructive way, oriented to find common solutions on how something in discussions could work for everyone, not just to find excuses. You tell us to make sure when we bring propositions that we show how we bring the money for it, although that's not always the case when ministers bring theirs on. But when I do show a clear math calculation that my proposition could be even overfunded, this is being ignored. The Treasury Minister has talked publicly about zero-rating food creating a black hole in the budget. Well, I would respectfully suggest that this is absolute nonsense. And even after explaining my figures yesterday, he insists this is not funded. Is this bad will done on purpose, or I need to help explain my calculation clearer, as I'm very good with numbers. I'll explain it once again then. Member will see on page 8 of my report that the income from GST was 106 million in 2021. This is the actual figure, it's not a guess. The Treasury estimates or guesses, as shown in a proposed government plan, a sum of 107.5 million in 2023. This is an increase of under 1% year on year for this. Again, sir, I would respectfully suggest that this is a most unlikely outcome with inflation above 10%. It's just not going to happen like that. It will be much more than that, I would suggest. Can I remind the Chief Minister what she said during the State's debate on 31st March 2022? This is on page 11 of my report. She said, "It is, of course, an evolving situation, and it is one from which the government benefits as higher prices increase their receipts from GST." So there you have it from the Chief Minister, no less, but many other specialists confirm the same. So, sir, again, I respectfully suggest that the Treasury Minister has been unnecessarily alarmist in this public comment as to what the much-needed removal of 5% GST on food would do to public finances and other budgets. I am fairly confident that the inflationary effect would continue to see year-on-year increases on the collection of GST, even with the removal of it on food. So let me explain it again in clear figures, the cost if the basic food zero-rate GST would be implemented. 10 million estimated loss for all food. I repeat, for all food, as couldn't be estimated just for basic food, which is much less. 360,000 estimate from tax department to include the necessary changes to law systems and additional staffing, including project managers and everything that is to look at that. The revenue to be used towards this now is as follows. 3.7 million estimates of growth in GST collection that's been given by Treasury as estimate when we know now we have a double-digit inflation, and we know as well that the estimate on what was over-collected last year from GST only was 12 million, at an inflation then at around 3%, and then overall GST collected on all food equivalent is only about 10% of all. Then 6.5 million is the budget for the current community cost bonus, which is in place to counter the cost of GST on food, but for a smaller number of people than struggle with food cost and that needed and covers. Then I also said that I have lodged another proposition which could bring up to 5 million if that will be accepted. Even without this 5 million, the 3.7 million from before plus 6.5 million from the community cost bonus, that's 10.2 million. So above the 10 million, which is for all food, I repeat, not for just the basic food. If we add the 5 million, we, for the proposition, in case it's approved, we have even more money to use towards anything else that we might need. I have followed all procedures correctly and brought everything in time. I have asked the officers at the GRAF if the additional funding from the new proposition has to be amended to be included in the paper, or it is sufficient to mention in the debate. They have checked the procedures for me, and it was confirmed that it is sufficient to be mentioned in the debate, which I did. A couple of issues that have been mentioned, which I believe are interrelated, and these are to do with red tape and capacity of computer system. Firstly, I want to remind members of our spending on information technology on page 61 of the government plan. It shows the following. The project total is 131.7 million, with over 50 million spent planned over the next 4 years. In the narrative of page 61, it says, integrated technology solution that will enable a variety of government functions to utilize the same unified systems. This will provide greater efficiencies to users and better realize the project's ambition to create a broader, all-encompassing back-office IT system for the government of Jersey. So I think if the stories we've heard about systems unable to cope may be exaggerated, isn't it? Is someone really saying that we have spent over 180 million on IT and is not fit for purpose? Then I seriously wonder the value for money. Also, I have spoken with an IT specialist, and I was told that there are many bespoke systems that are available off the shelf for smaller businesses for a few £100s. So I would suggest some members may have been unaware of this. Apparently, some of this information is usable even via a mobile phone. What I also want to explain, as I mentioned before, I've been working in retail, in hospitality, in accountancy. I run a business. So I'm working and have been working on a daily basis with exactly the systems that have to be changed. From the till companies to change additional categorization of products, yes, they will need advance notice to have time to do that without being under pressure. But as an example, to introduce the coding as a one-off at the beginning, because after that the systems will take it off, for 14,000 items in a convenience store to be introduced as coding will cost £250. So where is that big amount of money that the small businesses that don't have it will be there? It's everything, it just seems very exaggerated. Then it's been told that it's going to be a big burden on the hospitality system. From the onset, the proposition says that the catering food, it's not going to be included. What is going to happen at the, because I own a business in hospitality, what's going to happen is going to be that the supply food that they're going to receive is going to be zero rated. That's going to be clearly itemized in their invoices, which they will pass directly into their accountancy system. The rest doesn't change at all. That's to refer to the email that Deputy Gors has circulated yesterday and saying that the poor hospitality industry will face additional burden on changing when they have to change their menus and their prices. With every change that we do, with every system that it changes, every tax that we change in this assembly and in the island, will be in different departments and different activities that will have to come small changes to the systems. But that's the natural process, and we find solutions and we work with it. But it's nowhere near as complicated as it was made to be looked at. Members have put their faith in the community cost bonus. However, I am aware that the processing application is very slow, as it came from especially those two complaints of the people I met in the street, and I wasn't alone there when that happened. Originally, it was estimated 14,000 people would qualify. I understand that less than 40,000 applications have been received. We understood the figures, but this is not covering for everyone. It will be reviewed. We don't know in what sense will be reviewed after, but in this format is ending at the end of this year. So most of the measures that are in the mini budget are very welcome. And I commend the Council of Ministers for bringing it in so quick, because it was helping many people, but not sufficient. And as Deputy Helen Marks as well has stated, it went some way, but not long enough, I would say. So the financial forecast estimates from the Treasury and advisors. Some degree of both confidence and accuracy is placed on this in order to create a black hole, how they said, in the public finance. Well, I would contend that it's simply not the case, as you've seen in my figures. I wish to also share the following with members to demonstrate how far out some of the guesstimates are in short period of time. The mini budget was lodged by the Council of Ministers on 8th of August, debated on 13th of September. At paragraph 8, the proposition says, increasing the personal income tax threshold by 12%. At paragraph 7 on page 3, it says, in these exceptional times, the Council of Ministers is proposing significantly above inflation increases in personal income tax allowances. Well, now we know that what they are doing is nothing of sort, because even the 12% allowance has been already eaten by inflation. We don't have any proofs that the housing market has slowed down. We've asked them politely how they said, but I don't see that working in any way. And until that part especially is addressed, we're going to continue to keep on having increasing food prices. Because Jersey inflation rate is likely and predicted to be more than 12%, and we know that wage increases are not keeping pace with that, so to say in mini budget that what is being proposed will be significantly above inflation increase in personal income is inaccurate. Nobody is better off if we consider all the other pressures. There is no measurable benefit after the temporary measures are finishing. Whereas what I'm promising is a measurable medium-term benefit but on long term also, to thousands of people in and out of the community without the need to beg for it. And as I mentioned, I don't think the mini budget provided financial support sufficient for thousands of people, and for others that financial support has been there but will disappear shortly. But the very real cost of daily living, including the inflationary cost of food, still exists. Supporting my proposal will provide ongoing support. In the response to the scrutiny report from the scrutiny report 19 in 2022, in the mini budget, the Council of Ministers says, we recognize the importance of evidence-based policy making when bringing forward proposals. My question then is, how much more evidence we need? I have included lots of evidence and facts in my speech and in my report from respected community organizations. Another question here is, what is it about the evidence that is not clear when many people in our community are struggling with living costs because of food prices? Maybe members should go outside on the street and ask them. Maybe these people need to shout louder for their voices are not being heard. Also in the same report from the corporate services, the Council of Ministers said, the government will always, as a matter of principle, strive to base its decision on the best evidence available at the time. Again, I and others have provided this evidence, factual. So now it's time for principals to do the right thing and base this decision on the evidence that is screaming at us from many trusted organizations in our community. This organization gave us vital and valued support to help us through the pandemic. We needed them then, we listened to them then, we should listen to them now. They are in touch with the very real world. Sometimes it's not about another strategy or writing or review another policy. It's about getting out there at the street level, connecting with people, and doing something that really matters to them and has a measurable outcome with real effects. Sir, I wish to make some further comments on finance and manpower. There have been mutterings about how many extra staff would be required to administer removing GST from food. However, I have seen no accurate estimates of this, and my understanding is that some, if not all of this, could be incorporated into existing roles and enhancing with the technology available for product recognition. I must say as well that I'm very much aware that there are a lot of projects in place, including in the Treasury part, including in the custom, for enhancing these projects. So these are ongoing and some of them even ready to come out. So to say that their systems are updated to be able to even do a small categorization in products, a library of products which are having their codes as a one-off, I think is very overstated. I am very, to continue with that, I'm very much aware of important investments in these current projects to enhance the system both in CLS, tax departments, and also CSER 2, which is an upgrade to the custom systems, also in the light of the de minimis. Being projects in progress, it's much easier to build in any additional functionality necessary to categorize items while still in work. Considering the level of investment in this, it's expected to be an advanced enough system to ease any process and shouldn't be any problem in doing the necessary product categorization for such change. If it can't do that much, again, I query the value for money. Both the Treasury and Custom departments have confirmed that it would be an easier process for the related changes to the system and legislation if Jersey chooses to follow the UK VAT framework regarding food categories, as the design can mirror the UK arrangements and can replicate the systems both in Treasury administration, in custom, for retailers and for everyone else. Nevertheless, to mention the wording of my proposition. I've been working with the GREF to make it in the most flexible way to not be restricted. Even the wording based on the UK categorization shows that that's a base to look at, because still from the Treasury I was advised that that would be the easiest way to go by. But as well as saying, or any other suitable systems that can look at the zero categorization. So it's in the power of the Treasury of Minister to take it off from all food, from do the UK categorization, do whatever categorization he finds in the world or adapt locally that he finds it suitable for that. So I think I'm being very reasonable to put it in the power of the minister, which he has the will, I hope, to look at. I have also noticed that the report 146 per 2022, the next to the proposed government plan, it mentions on page 76 that 13 extra staff have been recruited for personal and business taxation customer services. I'm aware that the contribution part will move soon from customer and local services into the tax department, but so will the staff that worked on it. So what are these additional 13 staff used for, if not for enhancing and speeding service and changes in processes and for assisting where needed with the navigation of the declaration process? I also understand directly from the custom that 5 staff are required and were already approved within these new projects for the custom to meet the processing required for the reduction in the de minimis levels of GST from 135 pounds to 60. However, I haven't heard any highlighting of this and how cost-effective it all is, because I know that below certain levels, the amount collected in GST exceeds the cost of doing so. I also want to highlight that at the custom point, as with the retailers, the accent is added on a small number that would be affected a bit more, but not unrealistically doable, and generalized that everyone will be affected the same way to create an unnecessary alarming effect. Speaking with the custom myself, after they had handed the paper asked by the Council of Ministers on what they think might be the effect of this change there, I have further clarified with them that the effect is not as big as was originally thought to be at an initial high-level look. I'll explain the process briefly, and I hope you'll be patient to listen to it. Everyone that has a business selling food and has a turnover over 300,000 per year, which are the majority of food retailers, or even the ones below that are doing regular importation, so choose so, are already registered for GST, including with the custom. This means that there's no need to stop the parcels at the custom when importing food, and the GST is paid by the retailer directly to Treasury on quarterly basis, instead of paying it at the custom, then filing a return to offset it against the GST they collect from selling this food to customers. So no impact there. The ones affected could be the businesses under that threshold, and they import food more rarely, and the personal online food shoppers. In the first case, the businesses, in this case, will have to fill up an online declaration before the parcel is released with the value, which still has to be done currently, and select from the scroll-down menu after the custom will insert that library items, to select from the scroll-down menu in the Caesar system used by the custom, the GST codes for each product that are zero-rated, additional to the current declaration. The supplier provides an itemized invoice anyway, from which list the business can introduce the same item lines into Caesar. If using the UK categorization, that invoice would already show the zero-rated items, making it quicker to add it to the system. An option suggested to ease this process further came actually from the tax officers, together with the manager, for the tax officers, and for the ones that are also responsible with GST when we've met. This was to zero-rate the food items with no GST at the point of entry as well, which would create a similar effect to the businesses that are registered for GST at the custom, not needing to file returns, avoiding the additional administration and reducing compliance issues. On the point B for personal shoppers, many online food sales of the ones done at personal level would be involving the minimis tax. Therefore, same staff from those 5 mentioned would be dealing with both aspects of the sale at once. At the same time, the Council of Ministers has mentioned that in the changes in a lower limit from which the de minimis applies, the GST will be charged at the point of sale, with the supplier paying then the GST directly into Treasury, in which case the buyer is not impacted. If that wouldn't be to happen, the buyer has to select for declaration from Caesar system the items bought and which are zero-rated, which realistically, at personal level, it couldn't often be too large amount comparing with a business. Therefore, I don't see any reasonable explanation to need any more additional staff at the custom for the purpose of zero-rating GST on basic food than these 5 staff mentioned above, as already obtained for the de minimis part, which could be for sure covering the GST import aspects as well. On the retailer part, I really spoken with retailers and wholesalers at all levels, small, large. I've spoken with Jersey business, which engage with their businesses. So every challenge that they have brought up has been put in my report, has been researched, and has been explained in this speech here. After numerous conversations and contacts, I'm convinced that retailers will take any changes to their system in the pricing of foodstuff in their stride. If we have English company connections and then told IT and finance departments can deliver changes in a couple of weeks, so we have English company connections and the IT finance departments can deliver changes in a couple of weeks. Sandpiper are to operate Marks and Spencer's food shops in the UK soon, so we'll be well aware of the pricing regime, especially will be just food focused. I have also spoken to a tech guy, as I mentioned before, who has told me the system can be relatively easily integrated for small shops, just need advance notice for it. He even suggested it may be possible that it could be achievable using a mobile phone. Which begs the questions, why have we spent all this money again for these IT systems as per government plan if the resulting system can't even do that much as product codes categorization? Okay. So although I had to address some of the technical issues, that is not the real issue here. The problem is that there is some very real significant increases in the price of food, the highest for over 40 years, with no sign of stopping. So my proposition, it started for to address the cost of living, but it's not just for that. It's more than that. Food is something to be living on, and people will need assistance with food ongoing, not just in this crisis. This crisis triggers it even more. Sorry, just trying to find my order. I had so far in majority very positive engagements with different states members regarding this proposition, and I hope the vote will be in the same positive note. However, I still want to give you 3 examples of very disappointing comments coming from some of them, including from Council of Ministers. One would be, I don't feel anything different in my shopping basket. I don't stay to count the cost. So this, in other words, if it doesn't affect me, so what if it affects many around me? Number 2, I haven't had the time to read your report, which I mentioned it was lodged almost 2 months ago, but I don't support such as such, which was already explained in my report. Number 3, I would vote a certain way, but I'm worried about the repercussions to my role, hence my questions without the notice to the Council of Ministers yesterday and the previous sitting regarding the Code of Conduct and the minutes of the Council of Ministers decision-making meeting. During the last election, many of us engaged with the public in a variety of ways. They were telling me, and I'm sure to many of you as well, that states members weren't in touch, did not listen to public opinion, and most importantly, did not act. I hope this will start changing, and we'll remember with every occasion and vote who has elected us and who and what values do we represent. This proposition comes also from my experience of knocking on doors in the election campaign and people supporting the removal of GST. So I'll respectfully say to Deputy Joseph that I am looking after the San Xavier people that elected me, because that's what they supported me here to be for. They do so because it's unfair, unnecessary, and at a time of cost of living crisis, but not only, adds a disproportionate cost onto the bills of families across the island. If we would be to start introducing now the GST and had the option to leave food out of it, would you still think it's moral to add? Is it moral to add it to be taxed? I certainly don't. When this GST was introduced, it created the biggest red tape and cost possible on all industries, population, and to all departments, and everyone that I've spoken with confirmed the same, from Treasury, custom, retailers, population. But did they care of that burdensome changes and impact this has on everyone then? No, because it was in their interest to have it implemented. On top of the statistics show how much the prices went up on everything before adding GST even, both in 2008 when introduced, and same in 2011 when increased to 5%. We allow many companies not to pay tax, we freeze alcohol duty, but we tax food, something that none of us can survive without. Where is the fairness and the morality on this? I've clearly showed the red tape they said is more pink than red, and something very doable. Every change on anything that this assembly brings will have some sort of impact in different departments or industries, but that doesn't stop us to bring it as we find solutions. Why, when something is brought from outside of the Council of Ministers, we always look at finding all the excuses in the world instead of working together towards the solutions to see that happening? Previous assemblies committed to putting children first. How many of you had checked the child right impact assessment at the end of my report to see just how big impact not being able to afford to buy food has on them? Do you know how many children and families go to bed hungry at times on a regular basis? Many of them are not on benefits. Now we have the chance to remove a tax on the food for them and their families, for the pensioners discounting his last pence for a loaf of bread, for the hard-working families that despite working 2-3 jobs to survive is not qualifying for benefits, but before the end of the month doesn't have money left for putting food on the table for their family. So this proposition, it's costed. It's not just for now, it's for ongoing support for people. I'm very confident that we can clearly monitor if the prices are passed to the retailer. The large retailers have confirmed they will work with their IT, so we have all the means to see it. The relevant experts in the systems and industries, including taxes, custom, have clearly explained factual that the red tape, it's pink. And also the Solicitor General confirmed to me that the wording of my proposition gives all the flexibility they need to choose the best system that we can implement for all. So this sends, if we agree with this proposition, this sends a positive message to people across the island who are struggling at the moment. It says this assembly will do everything it can to make life easier, and we support the public demand to remove GST from food. Sorry, 1 second. So as you say, it's not just me saying this. It's factual. It's the many hard-pressed charities, organizations, living, the community, and all other organizations in the industry that this is needed. We know this because they have told us about record numbers of people approaching them for help with food parcels, for donations they have to do to food banks, for how they have to feed their children every day. These issues are in the public domain. Just check the social media and you'll see how many comments are just related about that. We have a crazy situation whereby supermarkets are donating surplus food or individuals are making donations of foodstuff and then they're paying tax on it. I would ask, are we really that hard up that we need to do this? Perhaps members should ask themselves. My proposal, if approved, will not reduce food bills tomorrow, but it shows our collective commitment over the medium term. And the Treasury Minister has all the means to do it sooner than that, and COVID showed us that we can do it sooner if we want it. In general terms, sir, I do not believe we are here to make excuses and promote the can-do attitude when the opposite is required for the benefit of our community. We come from different backgrounds with different views and opinions. However, collectively, we want to achieve the same things, to live in a Jersey that works for everyone, and I believe my proposition shows this, and I ask for member support. And I'll end with how the Chief Minister ended her proposition. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I ask for the appeal, sir. Thank you.
Matter is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated, 17 votes pour, 27 votes contre, no abstentions.
Could we have all of the names, please, sir?
Indeed.
For those voting pour, the Conotub of St Martin and St Saviour, Deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Lehegara, Ayer, Ward, Owls, Mezek, Coles, Porre, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Kovac and Andrews, and the Conotub of St Lawrence in the chat. And those voting contre, the Conotubs of St Helier, St Brallard, Trinity, St Peter, St John, Grouville, St Mary, Deputies Luce, Gorst, Farnham, Moore, Osoph, Balash, Moore, Miles, Scott, Renouf, Rose Binet, Jearn, Miller, Howell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson, Stevenson, and the Conotub of St Warren.
Very well. The next item of public business is...
Can I just thank to everyone for all their comments, especially the one obviously that supported it. And I can assure this assembly that it's not the last time you hear about this subject.
The next item of public business is the States of Jersey Development Company reappointment of 2 non-executive directors, P101, lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. The main respondent will be the chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, to reappoint Tom Quigley and Richard Barnes as non-executive directors of the States of Jersey Development Company Limited for a period of up to 3 years in accordance with the Memorandum and Articles of Association to take effect from the delivery to the company of the notice referred to in paragraph B below. B, to authorise the greffier of the States for and on behalf of the States to deliver a notice to the States of Jersey Development Company Limited in accordance with Article 21B of the Memorandum and Articles of Association to give effect to such appointments.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. This is a proposition which the greffier has just read out the detail of what it is in connection with. The Articles of Association for SOJDC were updated and approved in 2020. Those changes change the term of office for non-executive directors to 3 years of 3 terms of 3 years to encourage succession planning. These 2 individuals coming to the end of their second term of 3 years. So if members support this today, they will be entitled to serve for another 3 years, which will allow the board to carry out succession planning. The CVs of the members are attached to the proposition. They have suitable experience in my view and bring value to the board whilst that succession planning is undertaken, and I maintain the proposition, sir.
Is the proposition seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Those in favour of adopting the proposition kindly show. Those against? Proposition is adopted. The next proposition is the Rent Control Chair and Member nomination, P106, lodged by the Minister for Housing and Communities. For the purpose of this debate, the main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they're of opinion, in pursuance of paragraph 1 of Article 3 of the Dwelling Houses Rent Control Jersey Law 1946 as amended, to appoint the following persons to act as chair and members of the Rent Control Tribunal for a period ending on 12th of April 2023, namely Simon Burgess, Chairman, Ian Gray, Member, Guy Oben-Morris, Member, Neil Andrew Bunell, Member, Rose Colley, Member.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank the Assembly, first of all, for allowing me to bring this proposition today. My officers reminded me that the reason for missing the deadline, which was criticised was not down to inefficiencies. Unfortunately, the recruitment of the 5th panel member took longer than anticipated because one of the candidates was out of the island for most of October and was in a location where Wi-Fi was unavailable, meaning that a Teams interview was not possible. When we debated the composition of the Rent Control Tribunal, I made it clear that it was my intention to recruit a 5th panel member, which is why I withdrew my original proposition. I've done this and now wish to move forward. So you may remember that I proposed to nominate members of the Rent Control Tribunal in August. Although a proposition to change the composition of the tribunal was defeated, I took on board the arguments put forward and used as an opportunity to cast the net further afield. As a result, I believe I've now achieved a more balanced panel. I have pleasure in bringing to the Assembly my nominations for 5 islanders who are all community-spirited individuals with a broad range of experience and expertise in areas relevant to the needs of the tribunal. I admire any individual willing to give up their time to make a positive difference to the lives of islanders. The Assembly's previous debate raised the issue of the tribunal's rent-setting powers. I want to be clear that the 1946 law, the law that allows me to bring the tribunal back into action, does permit the tribunal rent-setting powers, but only in terms of the leases stated under that law. Therefore, as part of its work, the tribunal will consider how to apply its powers to a wider range of leases in Jersey. Let's allow them to get on with that. What we need to do now is appoint our Rent Control Tribunal so members can work on delivering a modern statutory mechanism for the protection of both tenants and landlords. Should the Assembly support my nominations today, we will, for the first time in over a decade, have a working tribunal that will offer a mix of perspectives and technical expertise, independent of government, and capable of delivering a modern, fit-for-purpose tribunal that we all agree is necessary for Jersey. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded? Deputy Meze.
So it's actually for some questions to the Attorney General, if that's okay.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Thank you, sir. In the Minister's speech, he referred to the Rent Control Tribunal only having power over certain leases that were prescribed in the law. Could the Attorney General clarify what kind of leases those are?
Is that the only question for the Attorney?
I'm sure there will be supplementaries after that.
Are you able to assist, Mr. Attorney?
Yes, I believe I am. So the law that is in question here is an old one, in that it dates back to 1946. The law contains an article, which is Article 2, which concerns its application. It is, there are a number of express exclusions to the application of the Rent Control Tribunal's jurisdiction. And perhaps the most important one is an exclusion for a let for a term, where a dwelling home is let for a term of less than 9 years on a written contract which is expressed as conforming and conforms to a standard form of written contract prescribed by regulations. And there's a separate set of regulations issued under the law. So that is, on its face, it's potentially quite a broad exclusion in that many tenancies will be what's referred to as paper leases, in that they are not contracts passed before the Royal Court on a Friday afternoon. And that is contracts for less than 9 years duration. So in terms of the tenancies which may be an issue, there are fixed-term tenancies which may be for a fixed term of, say, a year, which come to an end at the year and then may be renewed subsequently. There are also periodic tenancies which may be expressed to endure for 6 months or a year or 2 years, but then may roll on subsequently if the parties so agree. I have to say that in terms of case law, in terms of exploring and decisions of the Royal Court which decide how those provisions are to be construed. Case law concerning this particular law is very sparse. It goes back really to the 1970s. It doesn't, for example, consider the way in which this law interacts with the residential tenancies law of 2011. So, for example, there may indeed be questions which might be pursued by landlords as to whether it applies to flats at all. There is a decision of the Court of Appeal from 1972, I think, that it does apply to flats. But that decision was made in circumstances where the residential tenancy law had not been passed. So there may be a potential question there as to whether it now applies to flats at all. So there are, I think the short summary of my answer to the Deputy's question is that the law does need some urgent attention in terms of being revised. The Minister, I think, said in his opening speech in support of this proposition that he would hope that the members, or the proposed members of the new tribunal, would get on and consider these sorts of questions. So I hope that's of assistance to the Deputy and to members generally in answering the Deputy's question. But I think the key point is that the law does need some urgent updating, and that should be pursued in accordance with the many laws that are due to be passed by both Council of Ministers and may be brought in response to backbenchers' propositions during the term of this Assembly.
Anything further, Mr.
Quite a few further, actually, that do arise from that answer, sir. So the Attorney General gave a very helpful answer there. He referred to, I believe, Section 2, subsection D of the dwelling houses rent control laws about letting term of less than 9 years on written contracts. Do I understand his answer, therefore, to mean that the Rent Control Tribunal will not have jurisdiction to adjudicate on rent increases applied to residential tenancy agreements that have been passed in accordance with the residential tenancy law of 2011, which exclusively applies to tenancies of less than 9 years?
Sir, I think there will be real difficulties with the jurisdiction of the Rent Control Tribunal in those circumstances. The 1946 law does, for example, contain a criminal offence in relation to failing to comply with its terms. So there may be arguments that might be pursued by a landlord that its application and the exclusions are to be, well, the law generally is to be strictly construed, and the exceptions to its application should be broadly construed. So there are a number of difficulties with this law, and I repeat the terms of my earlier answer that it does need some urgent updating.
So there are still some questions, just to have absolute clarity on this. The Dwelling Houses Rent Control Law from 1946, Section 2, subsection D, says that providing nothing in this law shall apply to a house or part of a house let for a term of less than 9 years on a written contract which is expressed as conforming and conforms to a standard form of written contract prescribed by regulations made under Article 7. He described that as posing difficulty. What I'm asking with him is, actually, does it provide certainty that this Rent Control Tribunal, as established under this law, does not, as the legislation appears to say, have the ability to intervene on rental levels set on tenancy contracts which are of less than 9 years, as virtually all tenancies today will be because of the residential tenancy law, which passed in 2011. Does it pose more than difficulty? Does it actually say that they don't have the virus to adjudicate on those rental tenancies?
I think, sir, I don't think I can go further beyond my previous answer, because it may depend on the precise written terms of particular contracts. So contracts may be drafted in accordance with the written contract prescribed by regulations under Article 7. So it's possible that if the contract does strictly conform to that format, then there may be an argument that jurisdiction or the contract is within the jurisdiction of the tribunal. However, many contracts, I'm sure, will not be drafted in accordance with that prescribed format. They are probably more likely to be drafted in accordance with the format which is commonly adopted in relation to the Residential Tenancy Law of 2011. So I think I can't really go beyond what I previously said, because it may depend on the terms of the particular contract. But certainly that provision, in my view, does create real difficulties as regards the jurisdiction of the Rent Control Tribunal. And I think I can't go beyond what I've said in my previous answers.
Anything further?
Yes, sir.
Point of order, sir.
Yes?
Sir, it's clear that there's work for the Rent Control Tribunal to do and much updating to do also. But is this line of questioning relevant as we are electing members to the Rent? These questions will be relevant regardless of who we elect.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Well, I was actually going to come on and ask, because you clearly have in mind, Deputy Bezek, a sequence of questions, and I don't know if you've reached the end of that sequence, but the Deputy Luce's point, I think, is well made. We are deciding whether or not to elect particular persons to the tribunal. Are you able to tie these questions to that particular issue?
Certainly, sir, and I hope to do so. What I'm trying to understand from the answers of the Attorney General is the powers that we are going to be giving to people who will be appointed under this proposition. It's important for us to know whether or not we want to appoint them, whether we want them to have those powers that they will have under this law. And so it's helpful for us to understand what the scope of those powers are to determine if we want to make those appointments or not.
I understand that, but I hesitate to say, but it appears that the Attorney's advice is simply to the effect that it is uncertain what the powers are at this point, because there are various arguments and it will depend upon the precise wording of each individual agreement. Is that a fair assessment of a fair characterisation of your advice?
Yes, sir. It's a fair summary, sir.
So may I make a point of clarification?
A point of clarification from the Attorney?
No, from Deputy Mazek.
Well, Deputy Mazek isn't speaking at the moment, so he's asking questions. If he comes to make a speech, then certainly it'll be open to him to give way for a point of clarification. So, in the light of that, do you have further questions that need to be asked in this matter?
I believe I've got one, but then it also depends on what his answer is, whether that gives rise to further.
If there's one more, please do ask it, yes.
So the last question that I think I would like to ask at this point, again, relates to the tenancies of less than 9 years, which this law appears to suggest are excluded. Could the Attorney General confirm whether my understanding is correct or not, based on the Residential Tenancy Law of 2011, if a residential tenancy is for a term of more than 9 years, is that required to be registered in any way?
I think I would need to check the answer to that. Obviously, if the contract is for more than 9 years, then it should be within the jurisdiction of the Rent Control Tribunal. It's also registered in the Royal Court as a contract. Yes, it's registered in the Royal Court, yes.
We've reached that point where I would normally ask if members wish to continue or members wish to adjourn for the lunch and adjournment. If this is likely to be a significant debate, well then clearly it's a matter that members might wish to adjourn. Is the adjournment proposed?
Can I propose the adjournment, please, sir?
Adjournment is proposed. I think it's appropriate in this time the Assembly stands adjourned until 2:15.